Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto gets blasted into the past and tries to save Minato part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. The mission had been a success, as Minato expected. It was not arrogance speaking for him, just the stats and facts, and the confidence he had in his skills. He'd been prepared after all, as all good shinobi should be. He'd read his mission more than 20 times and was even able to recite it by heart. He knew what he had to do, calculated the failure percentage as well as the risks, and deducted that this should be a walk in the park for an ANBU of his caliber. Again, the figures were speaking, not his arrogance. However, Minato wasn't yet a seer, and so couldn't have foreseen the unknown variable that were missing neens crossing his path. Usually, it wouldn't have been such a problem if Minato had his team with him, or if the missing neens were 2 or 3, or at least Chunin level only. And of course, he had to go and jinx himself and stumble upon a group of 5, ranging from Haichunin to Jonin. Minato could boast all he wanted about his skills and ANBU rank. It didn't mean he couldn't see when he was screwed, or at the very least, in a complicated situation. And whoever thought he was downplaying it, well, they should just shut up and let him worry about his own ass. He'd been fighting the 5 of them all at once for a good 10 minutes now, foregoing lethal grace for raw strength and the thin hope of being able to create an opening to escape. Unfortunately, the brawny missing neens were working as a well-oiled unit, meeting him punch for punch and even drawing first blood. It didn't help that Minato was already spent from his mission and wanted to save his chakra for his escape or to summon a Battletoad. As he was pushed to his last resorts, preparing to unleash 1 or 2 Rasengan, a huge burst of burning chakra exploded only a few hundred yards from the fighting shinobi. Such a gigantic burst that the reddish chakra became visible and almost blinded Minato. The energy tide washed over them and Minato could feel a wave of it traveling through his coils, sending his already swaying body to the ground in a harsh thump. His limbs were shaking uncontrollably as if the chakra was too much for his system to handle, and if the anguished screams of his enemies were to be believed, he wasn't the only one suffering from this. The screams slowly died after what could have been minutes or hours, and in the now deadly silence, unsteady steps could be heard, gravels crunching under the feet. Minato struggled to not lose consciousness, trying his hardest to roll onto his back or pull his head up, but his body wasn't responding. 2 sandaled feet stopped in his blurry vision field, and before he could say anything or react, darkness finally claimed him, leaving Minato to think that maybe it was arrogance speaking all along. When he regained consciousness, body pressed against the soft mattress, Minato fought back the instinct to tense and focused on regulating his breathing, opening up his senses to his surroundings. As he couldn't sense anyone nearby, Minato cautiously opened his eyes, biting back a startled scream as he was met by a face so close to his that their noses were almost touching. His hand automatically slid to his thigh, closing around nothing, and the woman, from what he could see, straightened up with a frown etched on her tan face. Really? Trying to reach for a kunai to assault the one who saved you? Judgment was dripping thickly from her high voice. But Minato couldn't bring himself to feel sheepish when disarmed and in the presence of someone he apparently couldn't sense. He took an instant to study her, probing for weaknesses, and strangely came up with nothing. She wasn't small, nor was she tall, and her blonde hair, darker than his own, were swept into a lazy bun, loose bangs framing her roundish face and dark blue eyes. Maybe she was from Kumo. Her coloring pointed out that much, and if that was the case, then Minato was in trouble. Kumo wasn't too fond of him, and it was mutual. She held herself like a ninja, sandaled feet planted firmly on the floor, and slightly parted to better brace herself if needed. Her arms, previously crossed haughtily on her chest, were now hanging at her sides, one hand hovering where a holster should be, the other slightly curled as if preparing to punch something. But apart from that, she looked calm and was clothed like a civilian. "Where am I?" he decided to ask, not really expecting an answer but trying to distract her in the hope of maybe finding a way to incapacitate the stranger. She smirked, as if reading his thoughts, and sat in the chair beside the bed. It looked like she's been watching over him for a long time, judging by the folded blanket on the armrest and the scrolls littering the little bed table. "My home. I found you on my way back from a long trip. Your little friends must have been angry with you, if your wounds are to be trusted, and you saved me." It wasn't really a question, yet she nodded and replied, "Indeed. You looked like you needed some help, after all." Besides the taunt, she didn't say anything else about how exactly she saved him from the other ninjas, and Minato knew when not to push. Instead, he slightly bowed his head, eyes locked onto hers. "Then thank you for the help, Kunoichi-san." "You're welcome, Namikaze-san." And with that, all the tension came back in his body. Steely blue eyes glared at the woman, and despite the protest of his weakened body, he sat up, not wanting to appear too vulnerable. The logical part of his mind knew that if she wanted to kill him, she would have done so while he was unconscious. But the ninja side of him said screw it, and went on high alert. "You have me at a disadvantage, it would seem, Kunoichi-san," he said coolly. Not really my fault if you're dangerous enough for your name to be plastered into every bingo books," she playfully retorted. But her eyes were equally steely even though her body was relaxed, proving that she had no intention to attack him. But as Minato kept his guarded expression, his body locked in a fight or flight stance, Her smile dimmed a little and she sighed, rubbing a hand on her neck. In annoyance or awkwardness, he couldn't tell. If it'll put you at ease, I can tell you that I'm not after your bounty. And the name's Naruto. See? Now we're even. Not really, Minato wanted to drawl. He didn't know anything about her affiliation or her strength, whereas she certainly knew enough about the ninja to blackmail him or Konoha. Minato wanted to say all that, to grill her a bit more on her intentions. Why would she intervene in a fight that wasn't her own? Why did she bring him in her den? Why wasn't she more suspicious of him? But he could feel his eyes drooping and his shoulders slumping, strength slowly leaving him. He tried resisting the darkness that was trying to pull him to sleep, and Naruto saw it, and gently pushed him to lay back against the comfy bed despite his weak protests. You're still not completely healed from your fight, nor the chakra blast. Sorry about that, by the way, the woman whispered, but the words were all muddled to his ears and he stared incomprehensibly, finally succumbing to sleep. His last thought was that at least, his pseudo-nurse wasn't trying to grope him like the ones did back home. To be frank, Naruto wasn't expecting such a bad result in her jutsu. Well, if being, from what she knew, the first ninja to travel through time should be considered a bad result. She supposed it was a great feat in itself, and she would have been overcome with joy if it had actually been her plan to begin with. The problem was, Naruto just wanted to imitate the Hiraishin to help Konoha, should a war ever erupt again. It was a bastardized version of her father's, as there was no notes left on the making process. But she really thought she had succeeded in breaking the code. Maybe arrogance was a family trait, because who but an Uzumaki could manage to unravel the secrets of a jutsu made from seals to begin with? Fuinjutsu basically ran through her blood, damn it. Perhaps Naruto should have thought about the consequences of testing a newly made jutsu more carefully, but she had never been known for her patience, and no one was there anymore to tell her to be more cautious when it came to playing with dangerous techniques. Pain rung sharply in her bones at that. Many of her friends had died during the war, and even though Konoha had rebuilt herself pretty well over the last couple of months, Naruto could still feel the loss. Tsunade-bachan might never wake up, and Sakura was still MIA, when lying in bed at night, feeling empty and lonely. Naruto wondered sometimes if her dear friend was running after the always fleeing Sasuke, or lying dead somewhere, her rotting corpse waiting to be returned to the village. It was a nauseating thought, and as more time passed, it transformed into a deep-rooted belief that left Naruto cold and weary. Shikamaru hadn't even had time to properly mourn his father that he had to take on the Nara mantle and be a pillar for his two grieving teammates. Poor Ino was being groomed to become the new head of her clan, and had to live with the knowledge that her former best friend may never stand by her sides again. She at first resented Shikamaru for having been able to hear his father before he died, using her own father's technique. And she came to pity him, because his last words weren't for his son, but the ninja world, and Ino was too selfish to accept that kind of decisions. The sensitive Chuji made a habit of hiding to cry his sorrow away, because as the new leader of the Akimichi, he had to present a strong face. He didn't want the title, not like this, but took it anyway, knowing the Nara and the Yamanaka would always stand with him. Lee would surely be stuck in a wheelchair till the end of his days, and Tenten was the only member of her team left standing. Worrying about her main sensei and teammate, Lee would always plaster a big smile on his face, assuring her that everything would be fine. But Tenten wasn't stupid. She saw the winces and the dark gleam in his eyes. She knew his career would stop there, and she knew their team won't ever be like before, not with a member dead and the two others injured beyond repair. Hinata was thinking about leaving the ninja ranks, Niji's death still weighing heavily on her mind. I don't know if I can continue to fight, I just wanted to be recognized, to make my father and my clan proud. But now it feels all futile. I'm tired, Hinata had smiled with teary eyes. I just want to live and honor Niji's memory. And Kiba had grown jaded despite his crooked grin, finding for once true solace in the company of his ever-silent teammate. Akamaru had been a young dog, in his prime years, really. Kiba didn't feel like getting a new one, even though Inuzukas were known to fight with their loyal dogs, and it wasn't unheard of for an Inuzuka to take on a new one when needed. Shino's chakra coils had been too damaged to be healed, and thus lost his insects. He hadn't spoken much since the realization that his first friends were forever gone, and that he won't ever have them again. He felt naked and empty, and then there was Kakashi. Just thinking about him hurt, because he was Naruto's personal failure, died protecting her. They had been close, these last few years, a true friendship blooming between them. They understood each other better than they would have thought. She could still remember his hands roaming on her naked flesh, on that first and last night they had together before going onto the battlefield. Her skin still tingled from the phantom touch, foreign and so familiar at the same time, broad bare hands settling gently on her curves, never taking, always giving. They hadn't been in love, they were both too broken for that kind of things. Just two lost souls seeking warmth in each other's embrace, seeking comfort after their last teammate never returned to camp. Naruto knew that if she'd been quicker, stronger, then her sensei would have never met his death so soon. Hence her attempt at reviving the Hiraishin, and why she was now lying at the bottom of a crater large enough to be a cozy nest for the Kyuubi. Naruto stared at the baby blue sky for a long minute, thin white clouds spiraling around the clearing she single-handedly created out of nowhere. Stunned, she pulled herself out of the hole, trying absent-mindedly to get in touch with Kurama, but she couldn't feel anything. Either the fox was drained and needed his beauty sleep, or he wasn't there anymore. She avoided thinking about the second hypothesis, too shaken at the moment to consider the possibility that she was well and truly alone in this new adventure. A quick scan of her surrounding through chakra nature told her that she wasn't the only human being in the area, and it's on unsteady feet that she walked to the few chakra signatures she felt, hoping to get a few answers on the era she was dropped in. No need to say she almost choked on her tongue when she realized that the bloody, passed-out ninja lying in front of her was actually her father. As in young and alive. She didn't know how many minutes she spent silently freaking out about the meaning of this information. Was the Third War still ongoing? Had it already happened, actually? How the fuck was she supposed to keep her cool if confronted with both her parents? And acted on autopilot as she disposed of the already half-dead missing Nines before lifting Minato's body on her back, biting back a grunt. Despite his narrow frame, he obviously was packing more muscles than she expected, and Naruto was still weakened from her impromptu time travel. She let out a hysterical giggle at the thought. Shit, she wasn't dreaming, this was actually true. Lifting Minato a bit higher and speeding towards the nearest village she could sense, she gulped back panicked tears and screams. She really didn't want to go through another war so soon after finishing her own, but she also couldn't not interfere, what with the knowledge she held. It took her a few hours to find a place secluded enough, at the border of a peaceful, sleepy village. She wasn't even sure if she was still in the land of fire, but the smell of flowers had kept coming and going while she ran, and it soothed her. If she closed her eyes, she could imagine walking in the busy main street of Konoha, where the Yamanaka shop was located, their flowers artfully displayed outside the entrance, the heady perfume drifting in the air. She was lucky to find an abandoned cabin that might have belonged to a forest ranger once upon a time, and decided to make it her base for the time being. Carefully setting Minato on the dusty floor, she felt a twinge of guilt before shrugging it off. He was after all a ninja. A few hours spent on a hard floor wouldn't kill him. She went out to the village and bought a few things she would need to start her new life. Luckily, Naruto hadn't lost her belongings during the travel, and even though she wasn't rich, she had enough to survive for a while. Her chakra was slowly regulating, and she felt confident enough to use a few shadow clones to help her in making a home out of the cabin. It took a lot of time and curses, but after a while, a bed was set in a corner, and she laid Minato onto it after checking his vitals, steady, but still weak. The first day he was out, she didn't give it too much thoughts, too busy trying to meditate and get in touch with her demon, only meeting some kind of lock pushing her gently out of her mindscape. She also took this time to sleep herself, only now feeling the backlash of all the chakra used to perform her faulty jutsu. The second day, she went through all her scrolls, trying to understand where she went wrong in her pseudo-Horatian, but not finding any good answer. Maybe it had to do with her own peculiar chakra. She couldn't remember if she used the Kyuubi's too, and Naruto had always been fond of draining chakra techniques. Perhaps she overloaded the seal, and as a consequence, the time stamp took priority over the space one. Frustrated, she gave up on finding the solution to her enigma. She was never the smart one, always relying more on gut feelings than sound logic. The third day was passed looking at the still sleeping Minato, worry slowly gnawing at her. He should have woken up already. His injuries were not life-threatening after all. It might have something to do with her demonic chakra. His coils were obviously not used to the raw energy, contrary to hers, but still, Naruto was growing crazy, alone with her turmoil, deep in the woods. The more Minato slept, the longer she had to actually process how deep in shit she was. It was as she stared owlishly at him, nose practically mashed against his, trying to telepathically induce his waking, that he opened his eyes. She was as surprised as him, but managed to hide it better behind a slight smirk, not at all feeling as confident as she broadcast. It wasn't as weird as she feared it would be, to see him alive and moving. It was surely due to the Edo Tensei, even though she didn't really get to spend that much time with him, the war raging on around them. She had made her peace with him back then, and though she craved to have someone to confide in, Naruto wasn't as stupid as to think that it'd be a good idea to reveal the future to anyone. She'd take this secret to the grave. It was already dangerous enough for her to be here. Who knew what her knowledge could change? She hid her anxiety beneath thick sarcasm and didn't waste a minute to chide him on his rude attitude as she saw his hand's subtle move towards his thigh. The sneaky bastard, she mused. If I wasn't so paranoid, he could have killed me thrice in just this second. I didn't even notice he was awake until he opened his eyes. Damn it, where am I? Minato's voice was hoarse as he spoke, a lot lower than the chipper tone she got used to during the war. He was so distrustful of his own daughter, the irony. Naruto couldn't help the little tug at the corners of her lips. She made herself comfy and decided to give him some information as to keep him from exhausting himself with worry. Still, she couldn't help teasing him a bit by casually dropping his name, almost regretting it when he went full ninja on her. Or, well, at least three-quarter ninja. He was still recovering after all. Even incapacitated, Minato wasn't a man to trifle with, and she wouldn't want to risk pushing his buttons in her condition. A hand came up to rub at her neck and she sighed. What a bother! She should have just left him where he was and gone her own way. A quick glance at his pale face made her rethink that last part. He was actually lucky she was such a good daughter, even to a father she never really had. Weird, when put like that. If it'll put you at ease, I can tell you that I'm not after your bounty. And the name's Naruto. See? Now we're even. Skepticism was rolling in waves out of Minato, and even his face spelt "you gotta be kidding me." It was funny to see him with such a serious and kind of bitch face, used as she was to his paternal and sunny attitude. It was refreshing, and Naruto felt like the next few days will be filled with amusement on her end, and endless frustration for Minato. When his eyes began to blink heavily, Naruto pushed him back to the mattress, shushing him when he tried to resist. "You're still not healed from your fight, nor the chakra blast," she apologized in a whisper, fully understanding that he wouldn't want to be so vulnerable in front of an unknown ninja. His eyes were glazed, and she suspected that he may not have fully understand what she told him, and shrugged it off. It could wait until he was fully awake and healed. Plus, it would give her some more time to come up with a good backstory. With a last sigh, Naruto went back to her chair and scrolls, cast them a dirty look before sealing them away and reclined against the armrest, a hand coming to her stomach. She patted it, humming under her breath. "I really don't know what I got myself into, do I?" She mused out loud, and only the silence answered, leaving her to simmer in doubt and fear. The second time Minato woke up, he felt tremendously better. He still couldn't move without pain flashing through his body, but sitting up against his fluffed-up pillows was manageable. Despite not trusting her entirely, what kind of ninja would he be otherwise? Naruto proved to be a great help. "Can you lift your arms for me?" she asked as she probed at his ribs, and he winced, executing her demand. It burned his arms to keep them up, not unlike after being caught in a katon jutsu, or being grazed by Kakashi's Chidori. Unfortunately, he quickly learned that the blonde kunoichi had no skill whatsoever in healing jutsu, so they had to make do with what, in his opinion, were frankly archaic methods, namely flimsy bandages soaked in a so-called miraculous potion that just stung like bleach would when poured on raw flesh. At this rhythm, his body would take weeks, if not months, to be in good enough condition to travel back to Konoha. Naruto hissed as she peeled back a soggy bandage, bits of skin sticking to the smelly, reddish gauze. Chakra burns were never pretty to look at, and Kyuubi-enhanced chakra burns were the stuff of nightmares. Minato wasn't as wrecked as the dead missing Nin were. It seemed they took the brunt of the blast, and it looked like his body was doing a good enough job patching itself up, all things considered. The ointments she found at a local shop, imported from Kusa, was a nice help too. She looked up when Minato grunted, and grimaced a sheepish apology, trying to be gentler while applying the medicine before wrapping the new pristine bandages. "'Tis okay," he said between gritted teeth, "it's just a bit tight." What it was, the woman thought with a snort, consciously ignoring the fact that she wasn't known for her caring skills and might have been a bit too rough with the injured man. "Then suck it up, champ," Naruto shrugged, tying up the bandages and tapping a finger against Minato's left arm, signaling that he could finally relax. He didn't wait any longer to carefully lower his aching arms, heaving a big sigh and slouching a bit further in his pillows, feeling cold sweat on the hollow of his throat. Never again would he bitch about the callous medic Nin in the hospital. Never. "Do you happen to know how far away we are from Konoha? Maybe if the village was close, he could send a missive to be retrieved under the guise of a C-rank mission, the variable that was Naruto be damned. Minato just wanted to be home and forget about this awful turn his simple mission took. Plus, he reasoned that she wouldn't have done her best to keep him alive if she wanted to harm him. The kunoichi bit her lip. While the blonde shinobi was out like a light, she had made some inquiries in town, and was shocked to find out they were at the outskirts of the land of lightning. Either she had ran farther, and way longer, than she'd first thought, or she had been propelled fairly far from her starting point thanks to her faulty jutsu. She should really take a look at these damn time and space stamps. Minato saw her expression through lidded eyes and frowned. His mission had been near the land of rice fields, and surely Naruto didn't drag his dead weight that far in the forest she found him. He couldn't be more wrong. "We're on a patch of unclaimed land managed by civilians at the borders of the land of lightning." At that, a glint appeared in the man's eyes, and Naruto shuddered. It wasn't the kind of sparkle that hinted towards positive emotions. It was something darker, and dared she say almost homicidal. Apparently, Minato wasn't too glad about this new piece of information. "I see. Does it mean you're a Kumo ninja?" he asked in a downright chilly voice, a placid smile on his face, muscles visibly clenching under the sheets. "Scratch that." Minato obviously loathed the country if the way his eyebrow twitched when he said Kumo was any indication. "I'm not affiliated to any shinobi forces," she hurriedly said, even though it was a long shot as she never tried to deny his earlier claims when he called her Kunoichi-san. "Really now? You're awfully skilled for someone with no formal attachments." Okay, Minato was way too curious for his own good, Naruto decided. She wasn't good at mind games, it was Shikamaru's hobby, not hers. He busted her out before she could even start on her lie of being some kind of wanderer who'd been bestowed the help of some passing ninja. Never mind the fact that no sane ninja would teach an outsider about the shinobi arts, except for Jiraiya, and look where that went. Minato saw the flash of panic in her eyes, and had he been healthier, he would have jumped at her throat, a kunai ready to slay her for trying to so openly lie to his face. He wasn't used to such blatant disrespect, especially from those younger than him. But he'd suck it up, at least until he'd be able to walk on his own 2 feet. "Perhaps I'm just a defector," she said in an annoyed tone before smacking a hand against her mouth, berating herself for her stupidity that apparently knew no boundary. Way to go, girl, keep antagonizing him and making him suspicious. That's a sure way to win his trust, you idiot. Well, at least it provided for a cover, as unsavory as it was. To her surprise, Minato just arched an eyebrow before snorting. You don't want to share your secrets, I can respect that. I would however appreciate that you don't lie to me. It was her turn to snort, but much more less elegantly than the man. We're ninja, of course we lie. And who says I'm lying about betraying my country? Damn, she really didn't know when to shut up. Indeed, but you're way too kind for the likes of the missing Nin, Minato replied with a hint of amusement. She's not a very good ninja, he thought. She never tries to conceal her expressions, and is too impulsive. Besides, I've never seen your face in a bingo book, he added as an afterthought. Naruto frowned. Maybe I'm not strong enough to be worthy of a notice. The blonde shinobi smirked, and the time traveler felt a cold shiver ran down her back. True, however, someone who can completely conceal their chakra while being 2 feet away from an excellent sensor is, in my book, considered as highly dangerous. Shit. Her face quickly turned pale. She completely forgot about her suppressing seals. It became second nature to her, during the war, and Naruto never thought about the fact that constantly masking her chakra while in the presence of an S-ranking ninja, who still didn't view her as an ally, was suicidal. She was lucky Minato was incapacitated, otherwise he might have struck her down before even thinking about asking questions. She plastered a bland smile on her face, and Minato felt sick pleasure at seeing the brash kunoichi so ill at ease. It was always good to know he wasn't losing his touch. Maybe he should have taken Inoichi's offer to join the IT division. Forgive me if you thought I was being deceitful. I'm not used to be around people anymore, and I tend to forget about my suppressing seals. That said, Naruto held up her index, the tip shining a dull blue, before passing it across her forearms where her seals slowly appeared, glowed once, and then vanished again, as if absorbed by the flesh. She didn't miss the gleam of interest in Minato's eyes when she evoked her seals, nor did she miss the slight widening of his eyes when he extended his senses to feel her chakra. I've never seen seals quite like yours, to be honest. I didn't think it possible to conceal such a huge amount of chakra, he whispered thoughtfully, eyes raking up and down her body, trying to find and analyze some data he was missing. I had help in developing them, she admitted with a shrug. Back in her time, most people thought it was Shikamaru who helped her with the seals, but it was in fact Niji who lent her his brain and knowledge. He wasn't near as brilliant as the Nara, but he tinkered with seals long enough to understand them, in the thin hope of one day being able to free himself of the cage. He died beforehand though, and Naruto never gave up on trying to crack the curse seal, in homage to her fallen friend. Thinking about him, though, wasn't as painful as thinking about Sakura. She saw his body, she was able to say her goodbyes. Naruto gingerly rubbed at her arms, where the seals should be, and it felt like carrying a bit of the Hyuga's legacy with her. Seeing the melancholic look on Naruto's face, Minato refrained from asking a barrage of questions, even though it burned his tongue. Many of his friends back home told him that he could be an insensitive asshole when he was lost in one of his project, trying to create a new technique, or meddling with Fuinjutsu. So instead, he turned away, giving Naruto a semblance of intimacy as she collected herself and poked at his legs, silently asking for him to let her tend to his other bandages. Teeth gritted and muscles tightening, Minato let her change them without complaining. The flesh was less torn, his ANBU garb thicker there, but the limbs were stiff from disuse, which concerned him. A ninja was no good if crippled. How many days was I out? He asked. He knew his body well, and even without the help of a medic Nin, he should still be able to move freely after a hard mission or a bout of chakra exhaustion. Well, it's been almost a week since the last time you woke up, and before that, it took you 3 days to show a sign of life. I was starting to think about digging a grave, you know, in case. Naruto smiled with mischief. Or you could have just asked for the nearest medic to tend to me and see what was wrong, Minato hissed as she jabbed a finger in a ragged wound, testing to see if blood would come out. Satisfied when her finger came back barely stained, the blonde woman finished her wrapping. Told you already, we're in a civilian village, there's no medic Nin for miles and the only doctor in town is an old grandpa who can't really come out this far in the forest. Minato looked at the bandages with a critical eye. She might not be the best medic, but at least she did know how to dress a wound. He thanked her demurely and slouched back against his pillows. He didn't feel as weak as the first time he joined back the world of the living, and he wished he could go outside to stretch a bit, though he knew it wasn't the best idea. Do you have an idea of how long I'll be stuck like that? Naruto hummed a bit, a finger at her chin and brows furrowed. It was difficult to say. Minato didn't have the longevity of the Uzumaki clan, like her, and no demon in his belly to help with his wounds. A standard ninja would take months before being able to walk again after being so close to a Karama-enhanced chakra blast, but Minato was no ordinary ninja. I'd say maybe a month before you can stand by your own, and 2 before being able to walk properly and perhaps do some ninja stuff. I wouldn't hold my breath, though. He mulled over it. Technically, he still had a good week before the Hokage started wondering what happened to one of his top shinobi. He could try and summon a toad. At that, he flexed his fingers, feeling for his chakra. It was still unstable, but fairly manageable if he focused long enough. He hummed, and suddenly sat up, ignoring the flash of pain in his midsection. That won't do, he muttered. Come on, help me up, I need to start getting back my strength now, he exclaimed, trying to untangle the sheets from his legs with no success. Naruto frowned, unimpressed, but said nothing. It wasn't her place to tell the grown-up man what to do with his exhausted body. That would be highly hypocritical of her. Besides, he was a capable ninja and only he could really judge his situation. With a sigh, she stood up and helped Minato out of the bed, tempted to let him drop to the floor when his knees shook, just to teach him a lesson. He leaned heavily on her at first, an arm slung over her shoulders, the other braced against the wall behind Naruto. After a minute of slow breathing, sweat gathering at his brow, the man finally straightened and nodded his head, signaling that she could start moving. It was a slow process, Naruto keeping quiet as Minato hissed and bit back curses when his feet refused to obey his command. But when they finally stood in the open air, the shinobi couldn't help the small smile gracing his tired face. The young kunoichi carefully lowered him on a wooden bench, and he took his first fresh breath since waking up. The air was cold against his sweaty, pale skin, and it burned his lungs and throat. But it felt good because it meant that his body was still alive. After a long while spent enjoying the forest sounds similar to those of Konoha's, but it wasn't home, it could never be home. Minato opened his eyes and automatically tracked the kunoichi's trail. She was like a beacon to his senses, her chakra burning bright and hot. No wonder she had to suppress it, otherwise, any good sensor would be able to tell her position from a mile away. Naruto was standing a few feet away, her baggy civilian clothes gently swaying in the wind as she hummed a little song absent-mindedly. She puzzled him, to be honest. He didn't know what to make of this slip of a girl whose chakra system was as developed as a Kage's, but seemed as naive and inoffensive as a fresh genin. He wished she didn't try to save him, so that he could just eliminate her and be done with all the self-questioning. But even though Minato was a top-notch ninja, ANBU captain, an exemplary jounin, it didn't mean he was heartless and a dumb tool. His eyes narrowed as Naruto held a hand to her stomach before letting it fall away, fully turning to face him. She smirked. I can hear you thinking, what got your panties in a twist, Namike-san? I'm wondering whether to kill you or to keep you alive, he said bluntly, hands crossed on his knees. Strangely enough, he wasn't shocked to see her unsurprised. He almost expected it. Instead, she shrugged and shoved her hands in her tunic's pockets. Well, if you think you're good enough, be my guest. In the state you're in, even a Suna Academy student could kick your ass, she taunted, and ouch, that was nasty. Suna had never been famous for their skilled young shinobi. He smiled crookedly. Ah, I suppose you're right, Naruto-san. It seems I'll have to wait for my body to catch up with my intentions. A boisterous laugh answered him as she leisurely walked back into the house, yelling over her shoulder, yeah, you do just that. I guess that you'll be able to drag your sorry ass back to bed on your own then. Have fun! With that, the door closed behind her and Minato was left alone with his thoughts and unresponsive body. He sighed, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Who knew foreign kunoichi could be this fun to rile up? He had been serious, though. As soon as his body was healed, he won't be the vulnerable one anymore. And deep down, his gut instincts told him that this blonde kunoichi wasn't joking either about kicking his ass. The wind blew, and with it came a few leaves. He picked one and began to gather his chakra by small touches, ready to start exercising his control. This forced stay was sure becoming interesting. Minato stayed outside all week, unable to stand long enough on his own to reach the threshold of the little house. Frustration, and a tidbit of embarrassment too, was brewing in his insides, as he caught yet again sight of Naruto peeking at him behind the window's curtain. A hand pressed against her mouth to muffle her honking laughter. His death glare wasn't affecting her in the slightest as she nearly went rolling on the floor in hysterics. But the awkwardness apart, it was a good thing for the both of them. Naruto could finally sleep easier, without the constant paranoid fear of being stabbed by her oblivious father, never mind the fact that she had sealed away all his weapons. There was only one bed in the cabin, and now that Minato was lounging outside, she was able to rest in something comfier than the old padded armchair she found. It did wonder to her straining back, and she wasn't ashamed to admit she almost sobbed with relief as she sank in the ratty but cloud-like mattress. As for Minato, he was glad to spend his days outside despite the rock-hard bench he slept on. The nights were heavy with warmth, and the morning a bit chilly, making his bones whine in protest when he moved too quickly. Besides, being away from Naruto, a threat his mind kept supplying, made him focus on getting his strength back. His chakra levels were still low, but he could now summon little toads, even though it left him knocked out for a few hours afterwards. Still, it was progress, and now he could work on contacting the Hokage and eventually get the hell out of lightning. Stretching his worn-out muscles while breathing in, Minato instantly froze and winced. He smelt awful, only realizing now that he didn't shower since waking up, and Naruto seemed to only have cleaned up his wounds, which was apparently already asking too much from her. His skin felt itchy and he was sure that his state of dirtiness was a sanitary hazard to his wounds. Call him a sissy, but there was no way he'd stay like that any longer. Determined, the shinobi got to his feet, his grayish cotton pants clinging to his sweaty legs, and inch by inch, he made his way to the window where Naruto was still staring at him with amusement. Feeling his body protesting against his decision to move, he braced his bare forearms against the wooden frame, and his hazy eyes locked onto Naruto's. Giving up already, Namikaze-san? Her grin had a malicious edge, and she even leant towards the shinobi, as if to taunt him. She knew he could do nothing right now, he scoffed. I don't think so. I just wanted to ask where I could bath. Naruto nodded with wide innocent eyes. Yeah, you kinda stink, man. And whose fault is it? He wanted to growl, but outwardly smiled in the charming way he knew Konoha's kunoichi couldn't resist, head slightly tilted and eyelids at half-mast, his lashes almost brushing against his faintly flushed cheeks from his previous exertion. Minato knew he was good-looking, and as his best friend once crudely put it, he could make ovaries explode on sight only. And contrary to popular beliefs, he wasn't above using his advantaging physics to get what he wanted. And now, what he wanted was just a bath and some peace. Sorry about that, I was hoping you could help me, he said in a lilting voice. He wasn't expecting Naruto to cackle so loudly that birds flew from their nests. God, you're so girly. What was that, a seduction technique learnt in a brothel or something? Or were you in the kunoichi classes, at the academy? The smile melted away so quickly that she had to wonder for a second if it had been a genjutsu all along. A frown replaced it, a sinister, resounding crack coming from where Minato's hands were digging into the wooden frame. This time, when he looked at her with narrowed eyes, she felt like a mouse waiting to be eaten by the big cat. Her laugh quickly died as the man talked in a deceptively soft voice. Listen, woman. I'm tired, I feel beyond dirty, and my patience is wearing thin. I'm trying to be nice here, but keep pushing and you'll see why Konoha's shinobi are feared. The guy was leaking killing intent, and wasn't showing any sign of falling to his knees despite his condition. She narrowed her eyes and forcefully clenched his chin between her fingers, digging deeply into the barely tanned skin. Naruto then unleashed her own killing intent and hissed, if you think I'm gonna roll over and show you my belly, then you're in for a big surprise. You're alive because of my goodwill, don't you forget it. To her surprise, Minato was still standing and a smirk tugged at his lips. They stared at each other for an indeterminate amount of time before Minato cheekily said, a nauseatingly fake grin stretching his mouth while thunder seemed to rage behind his eyes, so? That bath? With a harumph, she released him and he wobbled a bit. That little pissing contest took a toll on him, but he'd be caught dead before he admitted to being mildly subdued by the blonde's power. She was more and more intriguing. It wasn't something many people knew about him, but Minato could never resist a good challenge, and that made him as much a great shinobi as a bad one. No Kage wanted a maverick as a weapon, and Naruto? She was becoming a challenge that Minato was eager to take on. Blood was pumping through his veins and his skin was itching. His fingers actually twitched at the idea of battling against the fierce kunoichi, and a confident smirk stretched his lips. He had even more reasons to get back to full strength now. The woman chose that moment of epiphany to come out of the house, a huge wooden bucket held against her hip. A blue towel hung from the edge and as she passed him, the shinobi spied a bar of soap in the inside. Dread filled him. Was she actually thinking about making him bathe with the ice-cold water from the nearby river? A frown wrinkled his brow and as he opened his mouth, Naruto looked at him with sharp, angry eyes, shutting him up instantly. The river wasn't that far, and they could hear the rushing water barely a few yards away from the house. It was a short walk, but the man relished in being able to slump against a tree. His breathing wasn't as affected from the exertion as it has been a week ago, proving that he was getting back in shape quicker than imagined. How he wished sometimes to have the famous Uzumaki longevity. A splash of cold water wet his calves and he tried his hardest not to throw an annoyed glare at the woman who just dropped the bucket at his feet. There. You can take your bath now, she said, casting him the bar of scentless soap. He snatched it in the air and when it became clear that cold water was his only choice, Minato tried his best not to pout. He was a grown man. And a shinobi. He had lived through worse. Composed, he bent down to test the water with the tips of his fingers, and regretted it. Apparently, his burns didn't agree with the position. Naruto clicked her tongue. She knew that it eventually would have gone down the humiliation path for the both of them. How would she be able to look her sire in the eye later on, without puking a feeling like blinding herself? And how would Minato feel to be treated like an invalid? With a sigh, the kunoichi tugged on the man's arm to make him sit down on a large protruding root. He did it without complaint, face already pale as he gingerly held his sides. Naruto won't say it, but she was a bit impressed. Many of her former fellow ninja would have been rolling on the floor crying from the pain. Come on, big guy, she said, resigned. I'll help you get squeaky clean and I'll rewrap your bandages afterwards. Arms up. Once all the bandages were off, she wet the sponge she brought with her and helped the hurt shinobi in washing away the grime and sweat, letting him handle the more private parts. Naruto tried to do it clinically, thinking of all the times she did the same for her comrades, and sooner than she thought. She was done and didn't even blush once, nor did she feel the need to throw up. All in all, at the end of the day, it was just another scarred body. Minato was shivering, and Naruto felt a twinge of sympathy. Maybe forcing him to use cold water was too petty after all, she was indeed the one to make fun of him in the first place, and she knew that in his stead, she would have blown a gasket much earlier. Really, his patience was to be admired. She sighed angrily at herself. Her emotions have been all over the place these last months, but it was no reason to take revenge on an innocent man. Well, as innocent as Minato could be, what with his death threats and grumpy glares. He was so not getting back his weapons. Sorry, she finally mumbled as she patted him down with the towel, trying not to be rough and jostle his wounds. At his confused expression, she added, for acting like a total bitch. Though for my defense, you've been acting like a huge bastard since day one. Okay, she was definitely not good at apologizing, but the idea was there at least. He tensed under her hands and Naruto looked up, intrigued. Don't call me that. The tone was chilly and unfriendly, but the grim effect was lost between his quivering lips and clicking teeth. It was too much. Naruto bit the inside of her cheek, head bowed as she wrapped the towel around the man's broad shoulders, and she completely broke when Minato sneezed. Her laugh rung through the forest, startling a few birds into a panicked flight. Man, you're weak. You didn't even go into the river, and you're barely wet from washing up. He sneezed again. I slept outside all week, after being in a comatose state for days, never mind the fact that I'm not at the peak of my health. Excuse me for being affected by cold water. On top of that, he glowered as he sniffled. Naruto sniggered a bit more before helping the shinobi to his feet. Alright, let's get you warm. And maybe we can talk afterwards about how to get you back home. He looked at her with surprise, almost stumbling over thin air, and she only smiled while tugging him towards the little cottage. It's not like Naruto spent the whole time away from Minato without reflecting on their situation. She was in no shape to go back to the ninja village right now, but she could make sure that the ANBU captain was sent back. Konoha needed all its soldiers, after all. Later, as Minato was finally dry and warmth was seeping into him, a mug of tea clutched between his hands, Naruto laid out a scroll in front of him. Write whatever you need to. I'll make sure it is sent to your Kage. He appraised her with his keen eyes, eventually arching a brow. Don't take it the wrong way, but I don't feel comfortable with you handling confidential documents. Naruto shrugged, unconcerned. Fair enough. What do you propose then? I can't imagine you'd be okay with me hiring some Kumo ninja. The blonde man sipped at his green tea, too sugary, he though while licking his lips, and shook his head. I think I can manage to summon one of my toads long enough to pass them a message. It was Naruto's turn to skeptically lift an eyebrow. Really? You sure you have the chakra needed? A smug smile tugged at Minato's lips, and Naruto wanted to slap it off his face. She never remembered her father as being so annoying and obnoxious. Maybe people were wrong back home, and she took more after her sire than her mother. You're underestimating me, Naruto-san. I've suffered worse wounds in the past, and still was able to operate at the best of my abilities. She was about to snort right when something tickled her senses and she focused. Chakra was being moved around them, and as she finally pinpointed the source, she stifled a gasp. Minato's eyelids had taken an orange tinge to them, and yellow has begun to slip in his baby blue eyes. All the time they'd been sitting there, he had barely moved, gathering senjutsu without Naruto's awareness. She made a sound in the back of her throat and crossed her arms, petulant. That was cheating. Of course he would be up in no time with the help of natural chakra. Seeing her sour expression, Minato chuckled, not even bothering to stop at the dark glare the woman threw him. For once, he wasn't the butt of a joke, so she could suck it up. It didn't take long after that for him to summon a small toad who greeted him with excited shouts and tears. Apparently, they'd been worried after not hearing from him post-battle. He quickly wrote a succinct note to the Sandaime before tucking the scroll into the toad's pouch tied at its neck. Stay with him, while he writes his answer and comes back straight to me. The toad nodded obediently before vanishing in a puff of smoke. Naruto had been worried at first to be recognized by a summon who would have blown up her cover, but it was a red toad she never saw before and relief washed through her. Maybe she should try and summon Gamakichi, to see if her contract was still valid, and if so, maybe the toads would have a solution for her time travel problem. Hearing the Konoha ninja's sigh, she glanced up at him and tilted her head to the side. Tired already? A groan was her answer. Minato's head was thrown back, fingers crossed on his belly and legs spread out under the table. His Adam apple bobbed up several times before he sighed again. No. A pause. Then a new frustrated sigh. Yes. I don't know. It feels weird to have so much chakra in me again, she hummed non-committally. She had never experienced a chakra drain before, and her friends often depicted her as a chakra tank. To her, it would have been weird not to feel full to the brim with energy. The silence was broken by a new puff of smoke, the red toad from before jumping on Minato's shoulder to give him the Hokage's answer. Minato straightened in his chair, eyes losing their lazy edge to focus on the scrawled message. On the other side of the table, Naruto was almost bouncing on her chair, eager to know what it said. She would never admit it, but she felt a bit anxious too. If Minato went away, it would mean that she would be left alone with her dark thoughts. Kurama still didn't contact her, and she was reluctant to go into the seal, too scared to acknowledge the fact that maybe her friend was gone. When Minato closed the scroll and put it back on his side of the table, chin nestled on the heel of his hand, Naruto gulped. This was it. The moment of truth. So? Should I be expecting a horde of ninja at my doorstep tomorrow? She smiled, crinkled eyes hiding her worry. A soft hum, then Minato simpered exaggeratedly. So eager to get rid of me, you're a bad host, Naruto-san. She kicked his shin under the table while keeping a sweet smile on her face, a vein throbbing at her temple. He stifled a moan as his body went rigid, trying not to jump at the attack. He smiled equally, sickeningly sweet at her, though his eyebrow twitched and a spasm went through his fingers, as if he was about to throttle the kunoichi. The Hokage can't spare a retrieval team right now, and since I assured him I'm in no danger whatsoever, at that, he deliberately stomped on her right foot, grinding his sandaled heel on her bare toes as she hissed and gripped the table's edge. We agreed that my staying here wouldn't be a problem, as Konoha doesn't need my services at the moment. So you're basically saying that I'm stuck with you until further notice? She drawled, sending one last kick at Minato's ankle. Deep down, a sense of relief washed over her. Maybe she could avoid her responsibilities for a bit longer. I'd say it's the other way around, Minato complained as he rubbed the back of his neck. Naruto snorted, and as she stood up to go into the kitchen, readying a new pot of tea, she said, I'm keeping the bed. Minato watched her back, his pointy chin cradled between two knuckles of his clenched fist as he leant forward on the table. I'm the sick one though. He kept gazing at her as the kunoichi threw spoonful after spoonful of sugar into the pot as she hummed. Does it look like I care? A defeated grunt was her answer, and a genuine smile crossed her face. The tea was done already, but Naruto kept herself busy, not wanting to turn around and break their amiable moment. It almost felt like being back in her Konoha, enjoying the easy banter as she would with an old friend. Unbeknownst to her, as light blue eyes tracked her moving frame, a slight grin upturned Minato's lips. He covered it with his fist and turned away to look out the open window, where Naruto taunted him earlier that day. It seems so far away now. Truly, it's amazing how much the two blondes clashed like a volcano meeting a tornado, and yet could still enjoy a moment of peace together. As he listened to the clinking of pots and mugs, Minato ended up thinking that asking the Sandaime for a vacation had been a good idea after all. Maybe if he accepted to face the challenge that Naruto has proved to be, his mind would quit harassing him and he'd be able to go back home without feeling a twinge of regret, without being burdened by the inevitable flood of never-answered what-ifs. With the careful use of senjutsu and thanks to his own stamina, it didn't take much longer for Minato to almost fully recover. He was still a bit rough around the edges, but nothing some training wouldn't curb. Naruto refused to give him back his weapons when he politely asked for them 2 weeks into his stay, and though he understood, and could, from a professional point of view, appreciate her vigilance, it still didn't sit well with him. It felt weird to be clothed like a civilian again after so many years spent as a ninja, with no weapon pouch at his thigh, but his ANBU garb had apparently been unsalvageable. Looking at his itchy, moss-green sweater, he sighed. Only silence answered him, and Minato sighed louder and longer, the edges of his lips fluttering as he tried to keep a forlorn expression when he saw Naruto's shoulders tense. Getting on her nerves had fast become one of his favorite games. Who knew boredom could so easily be vanquished? He took a breath, preparing to sigh again, and choked a bit when the butter knife the kunoichi had been using found itself lodged a hair away from his hand. Nice aim for the sleepy woman, he had to admit. God help me if you sigh again, Naruto grumbled ominously. It's way too early for you to smother me with your unhappiness. A thing he learned about the woman is that she could be chirpy as a bird in the morning, or irritable as a bear. There was no consistency in her moods, which kept him on his toes. It was his first time living so long in close quarters with a woman who wasn't a teammate under his command, and Minato couldn't help but wonder if all women were this weird. However, he believed some of her odd behavior had to do with PTSD. It showed clearly in the way her eyes would sometimes glaze over as she stared into nothingness, looking dead to the world. It was a look many veterans shared, but the lack of blemishes on her skin and her fairly young age kind of went against this theory. The shinobi picked up the utensil, noticing how deep it went through the wood. I'm not unhappy. Just bored. Then go train or something, she mumbled around at dry toast, too lazy to get a new knife, and too proud to ask Minato to hand back the one she threw at him. Well, I would, if only someone would be so kind as to tell me where my weapons are, he reminded her with nonchalance, the butter knife twirling between his deft fingers. Naruto snorted, blurry eyes narrowing. Yeah, I don't think so. I didn't forget your threats, buddy. Minato only smiled, buttering a toast for himself. He made a show of sharpening the dull blade of the knife with his wind chakra, cutting thin slices of ham from the dish sitting on the table. Naruto rolled her eyes, saying something about smug bastards, and Minato's smile took a chilly edge, fist clenching around the knife's handle. It wouldn't do to throw it at his host, he kept reminding himself. Even though said host was proving to be quite rude in her choice of insults. So, he began after clearing his throat. What do you do in your spare time around here, Naruto-san? She blinked twice, swallowed her mouthful, and coughed a little when it proved to be too big for her esophagi. As she gulped down her glass of water, Naruto took the time to think about the question. From what she knew about her wanderings when Minato was comatose, there was nothing really entertaining in the area, and the village offered not much more than supplies for the daily life. With a shrug, she settled for a mild truth based on her youth. To be honest, I don't spend much time around here. I love to travel and see new places. Ah, yes. I remember you said you were back from one of your trips when you found me. Still, don't you like the hot springs of the regions? He inquired, honestly curious. The kunoichi back home were always raving about natural hot springs, never really satisfied by the bathhouse built in Konoha. Naruto was kind of befuddled. Even in her timeline, she never really wandered around lightning, too busy saving the world and chasing Sasuke. and her travels with Jiraiya never strayed far from the land of fire. So Minato's question threw her off kilter. Again she shrugged. Yeah? I don't know. I'm not really a fan of hot springs. How do you know that anyway? Minato, for a second, looked surprised if not a bit confused, but his face quickly became blank. Now, Naruto was curious to know what went through his mind. Let's say I'm more familiar than I'd like to be with the land of lightning's assets. Way to be cryptic, Naruto thought. Seeing her lost expression, Minato furthered his explanation with furrowed brows. That comes with being a ninja of my standing, as if that made more sense. But Naruto nodded, feigning understanding. Yeah, of course. Recon missions, diplomatic shit, and the likes, right? Her fellow blonde shinobi quirked an eyebrow, drawling an unconvinced right before taking his dirty plates to the sink and washed them before drying them, ignoring Naruto when she tried not so subtly to slip hers into the soapy water. He learned early on that she had no domestic skills whatsoever. Spending a day puking his guts out after she tried her hand at homemade stew was enough to convince him to take up the house chores as a way to earn his keep. So, I was thinking, Minato began nonchalantly once the dishes were put away, drying his hands on a nearby rag. I've been cooped up here for so long now, and despite your charming nature, at that, Naruto snorted, I'd like to see new faces. The woman shrugged, feeling quite unconcerned. Counting the week Minato was out, he'd been with her for nearly a month, never straying far from the cottage and the nearby river. It was understandable that he felt the need to move. She snatched the last apple sitting in the fruit basket and looked at it. It was a bit wrinkled, but she deemed it good enough to eat anyway. Usually, she wouldn't be caught dead eating a fruit, but her stomach kept growling. Munching noisily on it, she ignored Minato's disgusted face and said, Feel free to go. Last time I checked, I was not your keeper, princess. No need to ask for permission. Why, thank you for your generosity, he drawled sarcastically. But please, do tell me how I'm supposed to find my way to the village if I never saw it before? Now you've got to be kidding, Naruto was quick to retort, still chewing obnoxiously. Aren't you supposed to be a ninja? Aren't you supposed to be my host? The shinobi argued right back, batting his eyelids rapidly and faking naivety. I don't feel like wasting chakra for something like that. I'm still recovering. The whiny tone he adopted made her cringe. Naruto had to admit he was good at getting on her nerves, and if the devilish smirk he sported right now was to be trusted, Minato quite enjoyed his little game. She was about to flip him off, when he decided to take a more serious tone, face for once devoid of any trickery, and brows slightly wrinkled in worry. The pantry needs to be replenished, anyway. There's an awful lack of vegetables in this house, and the milk has soured. I have no money on me, and unless you trust me with your savings, I'm afraid you'll have to stick with me. Okay. It was actually a fair point, and more reasonable than his previous arguments. Resigned, Naruto sighed loudly and unenthusiastically went to fetch a large satchel. When she came back, Minato was already waiting for her at the door, a light smile stretching his lips and crinkling the corners of his eyes. She almost stumbled, swallowing through the lump in her throat and blinking rapidly to chase treacherous tears. Like that, with the sun shining on his bright blonde hair and his light-colored clothes, the shinobi looked really like the father she remembered, soft and caring. It was easy to forget when he relished in driving her up the walls, always a snarky jab at the ready. She almost wanted to slap the grin off his face, to claw at his slightly tanned skin and tear his hair off. He wasn't allowed to look so familiar. How was she supposed to detach herself from her past life if he acted so fond? Moody, Naruto stomped past the confused man and led the way to the village, refusing to partake in the small talk Minato was trying to have. She preferred when he was mean and distrustful. It was easier for her heart to handle. The trek to the village had mostly been silent despite Minato's best efforts to fill it. As he babbled away, talking about the weather and the worthy touristic sights in Kumo, he kept an eye on the kunoichi's tense shoulders and the death grip she had on her satchel. Her frustration had obviously got the better of her training as she stomped loudly through the forest, always a few steps ahead the shinobi she shouldn't trust with her back. She was lucky Minato wasn't interested in killing her, otherwise, the woman would have met her death more than thrice by the time they entered the small village full of life. The sudden clash of sounds oddly comforted the man. It wasn't Konoha, but still, hearing children's laughter and merchants' cries was a welcome change from the overwhelming silence of the forest. Quickly, the blond man hid beneath a nondescript henge, medium height, dull chestnut hair, and soft green eyes, receiving an odd look from Naruto who shrugged it off as a quirk. A tower of smoke was steadily rising from the center of the village, and with a quick burst of chakra channeled through his nose, Minato could smell melted iron and coal. His nose wasn't as good as Kakashi's or an Inazuka's, but it was enough for him to deduce it had to come from a blacksmith. Without thinking, he let his feet guide him towards the smoke, already thinking about the sort of rare weapons being made in lightning. However, he came to an abrupt stop when a hand clamped on his elbow, feeling like claws. It was only Minato's perfect control that allowed him to not give way to his instincts, and break the hand in half. Where do you think you're going, princess? I thought you needed a guide. He sighed and turned on his heels, waiting for the kunoichi to show the way. My apologies, Naruto-san. You've been so silent that I actually forgot you were there. Yeah, right, the young woman grumbled, already making her way towards the open market. You're banned from going to the blacksmith anyway. No way you're getting weapons on my watch. Minato shrugged, not feeling concerned. He may complain every now and then about his weapons being held hostage, but truly, he didn't care much for them now that he was healed and with chakra at his disposal. Though he'd readily admit that he missed his pronged kunai, he didn't pay much attention as the kunoichi made her way through the stalls, lost in his thoughts on how to maybe increase the speed rate in his praised Hiraishin, until they came to the meat stand and he heard Naruto loudly asking for at least 12 pounds of beef. He watched with round eyes as the shocked, though overjoyed, butcher was already reaching for a bag, and Minato looked at the kunoichi's empty satchel. Wait, he said to the merchant before turning to the blonde woman who was drooling at all the displayed meat. Where are the vegetables? What vegetables? She groaned as she made grabby hands at the beef the butcher had yet to wrap away. Minato batted the hands away before grabbing the satchel to wave it in front of Naruto's face, distracting her from the meat. We've been walking through the fruit and vegetable stands for at least 20 minutes before coming here, and you didn't get anything at all? Naruto shrugged. I don't like veggies, so what? You gonna sue me? His eyes immediately raked over her frame, and she subconsciously crossed her arms over her stomach, feeling oddly naked. She knew she was a bit on the underweight side, her muscles leaner than before and her bone structure a bit too apparent. Eating properly hadn't been one of her top priorities, while she worked on the revival of the Hiraishin, and it's true that by dealing with the stress of her time travel situation and Minato himself, her appetite had been lost. Still, it wasn't a reason for the man to judge her so conspicuously. Not looking away from the kunoichi, Minato asked the butcher for just 3 pounds of meat, ranging from chicken to beef to pork, defying the woman with a silent glare to argue. Chewing on her cheek, Naruto eventually huffed and paid for the purchase. Ready to go to the next stand, the sweets looked good, and her mouth watered at the idea of orange-stuffed chocolates. However, Minato had a completely different idea as he grabbed her by the back of her collar, and without straining a muscle, dragged her towards the vegetables. Would you look at that? He grinned evilly. So many artichokes and kales awaiting you. She gagged at the names and started to fight his hold with no success. The middle-aged lady behind the stall looked at them, bemused, before politely asking what she could get them. The greener, the better, Minato smiled. Oh, you even have spinach! How wonderful, right Naruto-san? We'll take half a crate of everything, please. Over my dead body, blondie! The kunoichi snarled, cursing her lack of nails as she tried to sink her fingers in the man's battle-hardened skin. You do that and I'll shave you bald. You hear me? The grip turned into a chokehold as the shinobi suddenly pressed her against his side, digging his pointy chin hard on the top of her skull while chuckling. Naruto gagged again when she saw an old couple passing them, and cooing at the affectionate gesture. The bastard was good at acting, she'd give him that. Actually, make it a whole crate. This whole shopping trip had turned into an awful experience for the young time traveler. She was sure there was a hole in her skull now, and her feet were killing her. Her satchel was filled to the brim with carrots and other nasty vegetables she never asked for, and she shuddered as she remembered that Minato had sealed away many other vegetables and fruits. Ah, it was a productive day. Minato rejoiced as he stretched his arms, finally dropping his henge once the village was out of sight. He was not even mad when the kunoichi cast the satchel at his unprotected head, snatching it in the air and hoisting it on his shoulder. He was already making his way back to the cottage, not waiting for Naruto, who kicked in every pebble she found, grumbling all the way home. I can't believe you used my own money to feed me these atrocities, Naruto later said as they were sitting at the table, a large dish of kale and tomato salad in the center. Minato had served her at least half the dish, a smirk never leaving his face as he watched her forcing down the half-chewed food in an effort to not taste it. She was promised a huge steak if she finished her plate, and it was the only thing keeping her going. Well, it's your fault for being so stubborn about my ninja wear. If only I had a kunai, he sighed heavily, then I would have been able to hunt something down and not bother you with your eating habits. And if only I had my protective garb, I could scavenge in the forest without fear of hurting myself. He blinked huge blue eyes at her, a pout on his lips, and the fork in her hand bent in two. You're so full of shit, Naruto spat. I already told you, I'm not that stupid as to give a fellow ninja a way to better assault me. That's a bit hypocritical from you, Minato noted neutral. You've been carrying weapons under your belt since day one. Yet you don't see me accusing you of planning my murder. Automatically, Naruto brought a hand under her shirt, feeling for the kunai stashed there and gripping its handle. She frowned. It has been well concealed under her large clothing, and even though he'd been scrutinizing her for days, Minato shouldn't have been able to notice it. A small smile graced his lips as he leant back in his chair, slightly tilting his head back, consciously making himself completely vulnerable. It wasn't hard to guess. Every time you're startled, you shift into a subtle battle position and your hand goes straight there before you relax. Besides, you would be truly insane to shelter a renowned shinobi under your roof with no means to defend yourself. That wasn't good. Naruto had always been appreciative of people with a keen sense of observation. It was after all a praised tool in the ninja world. Kakashi, in his last days, had often bemoaned the fact that Naruto didn't think enough compared to her formidable father. She used to agree with a laugh, puffing out her chest with pride. Now, she just wanted to lament her fate and Minato's goddamn skills. Couldn't he have been a self-absorbed dumbass? Was it too much to ask? She felt a tug in her guts and gulped. Now was not the time for her nerves to play out. Resolutely, she shoved the rest of the salad in her mouth, picked up her dishes and dumped them in the sink before trying to scurry back to her room. Of course, trying to outspeed Minato was a stupid idea. It was even stupider to give him her full, unprotected back. He proved it by appearing in a flash behind her, and damn, the dude was fast even without the Horatian, 2 fingers stopping inches away from her bare throat as he leant towards her ear, his chest almost touching her back. No issue possible, her mind calculated as she felt the wind chakra pouring out of the fingers, forming a sharp blade ready to slice through her artery. Though for the record, disarming me will only bring you the illusion of safety, he whispered, playfulness gone from his tone. There was a tense silence during which Naruto tried to think up a strategy. She was trapped and felt like prey. Normally, Kurama would be in a corner of her mind, ready to grumble and help her out, and she wouldn't be so scared of possibly bleeding to death by making a rash move. Now that she was left to her own devices, Naruto was just realizing that she may have relied too much on her furry beast and his accelerated healing factor in the past years. The fact that shoving a Rasengan down the throat of her foes was her go-to answer in this kind of situation wasn't helping either. First, because killing Minato was not her goal, she would very much like to be born later, thank you, and secondly, showing him his own technique was a sure way to be sent to the IT Unity back in Konoha, and that was if Minato didn't kill her on the spot. What to do, she should have listened to Sakura when she tried to teach her more about using her brain. What are you playing at, Namikaze? She grunted when he made no indication of pulling away. She flinched, surprised, when his other hand came to rest on her hip. The hold was light, easily breakable, but sent an obvious warning, do not move. The hand slipped slowly towards her stomach, and if it wasn't for the chakra blade held at her throat, she would have trashed in the man's grip. All she could do was grit her teeth and tense her muscles as Minato softly pressed down, feeling the tiny bulge underneath the large tunic, before humming thoughtfully. I knew it couldn't have only been about hiding a weapon. Nature chakra can be really useful, he muttered, finally backing away. Of course. Naruto wanted to slap herself. She knew that senjutsu made it perfectly easy to spot signs of life, and yet she forgot all about it. She turned around briskly, slamming Minato into the nearest wall, her formerly hidden kunai now pressed against his jugular. The shinobi didn't try to defend himself, letting her press harder as a fine trickle of blood went down his neck. With stormy eyes, she snarled, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" "I could ask you the same thing," he calmly said, eyes hard as steel. Slowly, he wrapped a hand around her thin wrist, but didn't force her to pull away. The hand was just there to make sure she wouldn't actually slash open his trachea. When she didn't answer, only narrowing her eyes at him, he huffed, "What is a pregnant kunoichi doing so far out in the woods?" "So what? I like my peace and space, is that a crime?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You show clear signs of PTSD. This cottage is clearly not that lived in, and despite your claims of being a wanderer, I haven't seen much of your traveling supplies. I'm not in the bingo book for my good looks, you know." Silence. Seeing that he wasn't going to get a reaction, the shinobi continued, "There aren't that much possibilities. Are you running away from your village? I heard rumors about some hidden villages becoming more and more hostile to their clans with bloodlines. Are you wanted because of your abnormal amount of chakra?" He fired the questions with a firm tone, entering his ANBU captain mindset. The woman scoffed and leant back, nicking Minato's skin with her kunai as she released him. He didn't make a move to touch his neck, even when blood reached his wide collar, making it stick to his clavicles. "You're being quite nosy here, buddy. You weren't so caring a few weeks ago when you were considering killing me." The shinobi shrugged and decided to go for a truthful approach. "Well, you're a fascinating case to study. Killing you would be a regrettable waste. Your chakra is really interesting, and you're far from weak," he said as he recalled how her ki actually disturbed him. She could make a worthy partner, and his blood boiled at the challenge she would be in a ninjutsu-only fight. "Plus, you've been tickling my curiosity with your seal work." Naruto frowned. She only showed him her arm's seals. They were not that complicated to create for a connoisseur like Minato, and Jiraiya would have done much better. Seeing her confusion, Minato bit on the inside of his cheek, debating with himself, before heaving a sigh. He looked contrite as he uttered, "You're a heavy sleeper, you know? Not really good for a ninja, though I suppose your pregnancy has a role to play in that." He rubbed his nape and admitted, "I snooped around and found your scrolls. Really interesting sketches. You should hide your stuff better, by the way. Anyone could steal your ideas if you're so careless." "Yeah, because I obviously let strangers into my house that often," the kunoichi sneered, more annoyed than angry. She didn't mind him looking at her work, as long as he didn't stumble on her time travel seal. "Well, you've let me in." "That's not the same," Naruto wanted to argue, and opened her mouth to do just so before thinking better of it. Yes, it was. She didn't know this Minato. It wasn't her father. This Minato was too young, too frank with his opinions, and not yet the poised leader everybody loved. He was perhaps too brash, cynical, and sometimes too serious when it came to his job as a shinobi. So Naruto stayed silent, not looking at the man who already proved to be too perspective for his own good. Minato didn't seem to mind her silence as he went on. "I estimate I still have 3 weeks, give or take, before the Hokage has a team ready to retrieve me. so I'll be straightforward. This caught her attention as she looked up, an eyebrow cocked, waiting suspiciously for the rest of his sentence. He had been watching her since the first day they met. He had seen the controlled movements, the repressed energy. He had sensed the easy flow of chakra, like giant waves licking the shores of her body. This kunoichi was truly good, with a potential that just asked to be unleashed. If he was honest, Minato had been envious at first of her obvious strength. If he had it, he sure wouldn't be sabotaging himself by keeping away from the world, hiding in a desolated cottage lost in the woods. But what had really caught his attention hadn't been so much the strength, but the loneliness hidden behind her eyes. It was a feeling he was familiar with, seeing it in the eyes of some friends and teammates. Seeing it in his own eyes more often than he'd be willing to admit. Discovering by chance that this lonely woman, who was somehow traumatized by her kunoichi life, was pregnant had been what really drove the man to see the human behind the lethal weapon. And what he saw he actually learned to like. They were similar, him and her. His gaze never wavered as dark blue eyes met baby blue ones. Come with me. Come to the leaf. She had laughed. Hard, and right in his face, almost choking for breath. She had laughed, and then ran to her room, banging the door shut behind her, cheeks growing pale as she plastered herself against the closed door. Minato didn't try to follow, giving her the privacy she needed. Naruto's mind was in disarray, and as she sat cross-legs on her ratty bed, hands firmly perched on her bony knees, she decided that it was high time to try establishing contact with her furry friend. Breathing deeply, calming her inner turmoil, Naruto started to empty her head. It took several minutes before her racing heart finally slowed down, and she could feel herself slipping away in the depth of her mind. She met the usual blockage since she'd been dumped into this era, a gentle rebuttal, pushing her away as she tried to bypass the invisible wall. Usually, this is where she gave up, not wanting to force the issue. She was no Yamanaka, and who knew what damage she could inflict her own mind by trying to violate it. However, this time, Naruto didn't stop, shoving harder and harder against the wall. Her whole body was tensing as she battled against her own self, and it felt like tumbling down a never-ending pit when the wall abruptly vanished. When she opened her eyes, only darkness surrounded her, familiar gutters and sewers spreading around her mindscape. The dirty water was licking her ankles, and the faraway echo of dripping drops greeted her. Naruto frowned, confused. What the hell, she muttered, padding through the water, the splashes she made the only sounds in the otherwise empty gutters. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She hadn't seen these gutters for years now. It should have been a wide and white space greeting her, not a dirty swamp. Quickening her steps, almost breaking into a run, Naruto took familiar corners before coming to a stop when the water started to recede, unveiling an unyielding concrete ground. Her sandaled feet thumped loudly against it as she walked to the center of the large room, the giant prison of the tailed beast looming just a few yards before her. She peered into it, eyes narrowed in an effort to see something through the dark. When she saw nothing, she huffed. It wasn't that odd. The Kyuubi had a knack for hiding in the shadows, when she was younger, only to jump at the bars just to scare her. With a confident step, she walked to the bars, noticing that the flimsy seal having once kept the doors closed wasn't there. This was when she realized that the gates were actually ajar. She slipped through them, heart beating a wild tattoo against her ribs. Nothing attacked her, and nothing disrupted the air as she ran through the colossal cage, rattling the bars and waving her arms around. She ran around it at least thrice, screaming Kurama's name at the top of her lungs, and before she knew it, her feet skidded to a stop and Naruto looked blindly in front of her. Nothing. There was absolutely nothing. The cage was empty. Kurama was gone. Naruto was alone. Minato stayed clear of the room, only approaching the door to leave a tray of food before going back outside to meditate. When he came back at nightfall, the tray had been left untouched, and a frown wrinkled the corners of his lips. He couldn't help but silently judge her. What kind of woman would let herself starve while pregnant? He knew how Kumo's kunoichi were fierce, and often miscarried due to them putting their career above their unborn child's health. IWA would say it was admirable, but in Konoha, it was frowned upon. They needed new blood too much to allow their kunoichi such free reign over their bodies. The man wanted to barge into the room and force the food down her throat, consequences be damned. But he stayed put, bringing out new dishes instead and tossing the wasted food away. The thing that really worried him was the lack of movement coming from the eerily silent room. And if it wasn't for the fact that Naruto never activated back her chakra-concealing seals, Minato would have never guessed that someone was in there. Maybe it had been a mistake on his part to confront her like he did. It was tactless, to put her on the spot like that. He didn't even do it out of concern for her well-being. He just wanted to knock her down a peg, to remind her she could play the boss all she wanted. Minato wasn't to be trifled with. And the worst is, he had kind of relished in the frightened glint that made her eyes glassy, and the slight shiver that ran down her arms. He had felt like the predator who just caught his clever prey between his claws, and it was empowering. The shinobi sighed, disgusted. It was high time he went back to Konoha, so he could shed his Anbu skin and let his guard down once more. The thrill of mission was still singing in his blood, and as long as he hadn't handed his report to the Hokage and was ordered to rest, he knew he'd stay like that, downright asshole-ish, and utterly uncaring. Not that he wasn't an asshole to begin with, Their resident Uzumaki never failed to remind him of the fact when they hung out together, and the blonde would use the redhead as a deterrent when women tried to flirt with him. But still, usually, he could hide it better under charming smiles and flowery words. He's brought out of his moody thoughts by the click of the door as it swung open. He stamped down his instinct to dodge the pillow coming at his head, and let it hit him, not even questioning the abuse. You deserve it, bastard, Naruto still grumbled, taking one look at the tray that she almost overturned before lifting it, grumpily plumping down across the blonde man at the table before taking the offered chopsticks to eat. Neither spoke, letting the silence settle over them once again. She was hungry after staying scooped all day inside her room, thinking about her options and making decisions. Her eyes were red and swollen, and for once, Minato didn't say anything at the insult. She had been crying, he thought. She had been crying without ever making a sound. It didn't take long for the woman to finish her food, patting serenely her little bump afterwards. Minato followed the movement, and softly asked, genuinely curious, how far along are you? Naruto had to actually stop and think for a second. She had refused to be seen by a doctor back in her time, too consumed by her goal and too nervous to step inside the hospital. It held bad memories, because both Tsunade and Sakura were as good as dead, and seeing the green chakra glowing in someone else's hands made her want to throw up and die. I'm halfway through my 8th month, she eventually calculated. Pardon? Minato spluttered, looking at her with wide eyes. What? She said defensively, arms crossed over her stomach. You look to be 5 months in, at most. Naruto shrugged. This kind of speech went over her head. I was in denial for the first 6 months. She recited dutifully what Ino had explained to her during her first and only examination after she almost fainted from an unexplainable exhaustion. The baby is only starting to show now as a result, and still has to push against my abdominal muscles to get some room. The fact that she wasn't the healthiest of persons to begin with also played a role in her child's small size, and she was still trying to take the habit of taking care of herself now that she was housing a new life. It was still a work in progress, and sometimes, she sarcastically wondered if she was channeling her inner Kakashi. In denial, Minato thought. It was a rare occurrence, in ninja villages, where women practically chose the exact moment they would try and make a baby. It helped organizing new rosters for the missions, and there was seldom a shortage of active kunoichi. But Naruto, if she was to be trusted, was not from Kumo or any other hidden village. Which meant this baby was either an unwanted mistake, or made at a horrible timing. Is the father? He trailed off, having no idea of how to frame his question. It turned out he didn't have to, as the blonde woman immediately cut him off, eyes riveted on her empty plate. Dead. She cleared her throat, but her voice was still hoarse. He died saving me in one of our more adventurous trips. Oh. The shinobi didn't say anything else, nodding in silence. There was no need to offer condolences. It was futile, in the ninja world, and from the sound of it, that man died a good, respectable death. No need to feel sorry for him, nor for the strong woman who undoubtedly unleashed her wrath on her lover's murderers. Instead, Minato let the silence befall them for a respectful minute before broaching the real topic he was interested in. Have you given thought to my offer? Yes. Do you have an answer? I do. Her hands curled into fists under the table, but her face stayed as blank as Minato's. She had thought hard and long about her situation, and what she should do. Clearly, Kurama had come to the past with her. Her father's healed burns were a dead giveaway, after all. So if he wasn't inside her seal, it could only mean two things. Either the fox had somehow been absorbed by her mother's seal, or her Kurama had ceased to exist due to this time's replica. Thinking about the second hypothesis left her cold and anxious, but it was the hypothesis that made the more sense. Logically speaking, two same souls couldn't exist in one world. As time travelers, they were an anomaly. They shouldn't be there, and what better way to write the universe than by erasing them? If this was true, it meant Naruto had only a limited amount of time to help prevent some key events before she, too, would disappear. The only consoling thought was to know her child would surely be born by then, and there was no way this time's Kakashi would one day entertain the idea of sleeping with his very much alive sensei's daughter, meaning her baby was safe and sound, no matter what. In any case, Naruto didn't have much of choice. She had to go to Konoha, if only to see for herself what happened to her old friend. If all was well and her first hypothesis was validated, it meant one less thing to worry about, and she would have more time to plan and act. Hopefully, she came back far enough in time so that she would only deal with the old man Sandaime. She loved her father, but really, after a month living in close quarter with him and dealing with his suspicions and threats, Naruto didn't think he would listen to her babbling about the future. He would label her a certified nutcase, and she'd be dumped in a cell, just because the weirdo was apparently too interested in her seal works and potent chakra to kill her this soon in the game. TCH. Releasing a deep sigh, Naruto looked Minato right in the eyes and said, I'll come. But there's still a problem. He frowned, aptly concealing his relief at her answer. And what would it be? Naruto bit her lip. She didn't know what events already occurred, but it was a safe bet to assume tensions were already there between the nations. The time traveler chose her next words carefully. I'm a foreigner, and even tough I'm not affiliated to any ninja village. I highly doubt Konoha would welcome me with open arms. No Kage wants an unknown trained shinobi in his ranks. That would be asking for trouble. I don't want to risk our lives at that. She touched her belly to emphasize her point, even though your offer is quite tempting. I need reassurance that no harm will come to me, to us. There was a long minute of silence as Minato crossed his fingers together under his chin, contemplative. His clear eyes held a calculating glint in them, and when he finally drew breath to talk, Naruto knew she wouldn't like what he had to say. I may have a solution, but you're not going to like it. His voice had taken a hoarse quality to it, betraying his calm composure. Maybe Minato himself didn't really like what he was about to propose. Naruto narrowed her eyes and pursed her lips before shrugging. It wouldn't cost her anything to at least hear him out. I'm listening. Be my wife. It wasn't even a question so much as a blunt statement, delivered so matter-of-factly that Naruto could only splutter in surprise, eyes wide as saucers. She tried to laugh it off, because, surely, her father couldn't be serious about his goddamn proposal. But Minato raised his voice, talking over her hysterical protests. It actually makes sense. Think about it, you'll be linked to a powerful, extremely loyal ninja of the leaf, he explained as her voice died down, and her eyes kept staring at him in horror. Sure, there will be suspicion, but you'll be accepted nonetheless because of my status. Besides, the Hokage would actually be thrilled by the prospect. As he spoke, Minato slowly grew more and more convinced that this was actually a perfect plan. It served both his selfish reasons, i.e., being able to study more closely the intriguing Kunoichi and a way of repaying his life debt by taking care of her reckless, pregnant self, and political ones. The council was nagging him for an heir to kickstart what could become a Namake's clan in Konoha, and marrying a foreign, skilled Kunoichi could pave the way to a peace treaty between two fearsome villages. It definitely was a brilliant plan, the shinobi smirked inwardly. But Naruto was clearly not of the same opinion. How? She yelled, slamming several times her hand on the table, as if to hammer down her points. He'd see one of his most formidable shinobi married to a foreigner hailing from enemy territory. He could accuse me of trying to sway you towards another hidden village, and I'd be executed. Not that she thought the Sandaime heartless, but come on. Everybody knew he only started to mellow down once the third shinobi war had ended and Minato had been made the fourth. At this moment of the timeline, for all Naruto knew, Hiruzen could be merciless and relying heavily on Danzo's more radical opinions. Because we'll say you're from Kumo, he stated nonchalantly while nodding his head, as if it should suddenly make sense. To Naruto, it didn't, only serving to confuse her more. What a great idea, she sneered. Let's tell him I'm from a village that has a notoriously bad history with Konoha. Splendid job. Namake's? Are you actually trying to get me killed? And she was serious with that question, too. It would indeed explain the man's dumb ideas. Minato scowled, and Naruto felt like he was staring at her with a judgmental look, screaming idiot. The man went on to explain in a teacher-like tone, it would be seen as a great alliance, actually. An act of peace between Kumo and Konoha. I don't see how. Call me dumb, but I really can't make the connections, the Kunoichi yelled, getting frustrated. She raked a hand through her disheveled hair and grimaced when it caught on a knot. Absent-mindedly, she noted that it was high time to get a haircut, or to at least have a date with the trusty brush. On the other side of the table, a thoughtful Minato crossed his arms while leaning back in his chair, assessing the flailing Kunoichi in front of him. It couldn't be that she was that oblivious, he thought. Still, curious, he inquired, Naruto-san, have you been living under a rock? She hissed an insult at him, while blushing furiously, clearly refusing to answer the question. Surprised, Minato arched his eyebrows. I can't believe you're serious, it makes more sense, now. No, it doesn't, she muttered, sorely tempted to kick his shin under the table. Her mind was still whirling with his impromptu proposal and arguments, and she rued Kurama's absence as much as she blessed it. On one hand, the fox would have told her what to do, on the other hand, he would have surely laughed his ass off while spouting crude remarks about inbreeding. Naruto almost gagged at the unwelcome thought. Unaware of her torment, Minato started to explain, I, myself, am not originally from Konoha. I was born in Kumo, and lived there for the first 5 years of my life. And that was all it took for Naruto's mind to come to a screeching halt, leaving her gaping at the man she was supposed to know inside out. 1. Because he was her freaking dad. 2. Because he'd been her idol while growing up. That was so not written in the Academy's history books, or she had been skipping class that day. Or snoozing. But still. How could she have missed that information? I'm the illegitimate son of the late Raikage, the blonde continued, unbothered by the Kunoichi's evident surprise. My mother was a civilian with no family to speak of. She let herself be seduced and became the Kage's mistress for a short while. When he made it clear that I was never to be considered his son, she decided to leave the land of lightning and settle down in the land of fire. Okay, Naruto really needed time to process that, because she didn't see it coming. Come on. She couldn't have snoozed through that lesson too. Was she that oblivious to her own genealogy? Oh God, it could explain why B had always been fond of her, or why I, though full of disdain, actually gave her a chance to prove her worth. She was going to be sick, and it had nothing to do with her baby mastering their taijutsu skills by using her insides as a practice dummy. Eventually, Naruto could only nod, gulping down her nausea before clearing her throat out, trying to take control over her trembling voice. When she felt more at ease, she asked, still dumbfounded, but don't you already have a significant other? Surely Minato was already infatuated with her mom at this point of the story. Heck, they should already be dating, and thinking about tying the knot. Something was wrong, Naruto thought with dread. It was confirmed when the future Hokage shook his head, unconcerned. I'm unattached. In fact, you would do me a great service by accepting my proposal. It would save me the bother of finding a suitable bride to please my leader. I don't even know what to say, Naruto choked out. Did it mean that Kushina and Minato started dating just because of the council's pressure? It looked like it, at least. What with the man's obvious disinterest in settling down, God, her life was so fucked up. She should totally wash her hands of this whole mess, let history happens, and live like a hermit in the woods. Too bad her sense of justice was too big to be ignored. The blonde male shrugged, further proving how much he didn't care about his own personal life. Instead, he launched into an elaborate explanation on why this plan could work for real. There's a tradition among Kumo's less thriving clans. To avoid family feuds, children are betrothed at a young age. This way, heirs can focus on their career and education instead of gallivanting around, lovesick. That's why Kumo's percentage of kunoichi is so high. Women from these small clans are already aware of their future marital life, and wish to devote as much time as possible to their career before having to step down to fulfill their duty, meaning, giving a future heir to pass down their legacy. Privately, Naruto wondered if that was why Ino chose a path that would see her confined inside Konoha's walls, and why Hinata completely resigned from the forces. Of course, if a better match is found, the betrothal can be broken, Minato continued as he stood up, moving towards the stove. He put the kettle on the lit stove, measuring the amount of tea leaves he put in the water. I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at, Naruto lied. She swallowed through the lump in her throat, hoping to God her father wasn't going to say what she knew he would say. A metallic clang came from the kettle as Minato closed the lid and hummed, his back facing her. We'll say we were betrothed while I still lived in Kumo, and that my mother broke the contract once she decided to move away. I was sent on a long-term mission in the land of rice, 3 years ago, and this is where we met again. As Minato turned around, his eyes trailed up and down her body. There was no lust in the action, just curiosity and contemplation. He sat down next to her this time, his arm almost brushing against hers. Naruto leaned away, but he clamped a hand on her elbow, pulling her towards him as he continued, we fell in love, and decided to fulfill the betrothal. Me, because I wanted to rekindle with my brothers. You, because you wished to escape Kumo after your last family member died. It had been a shot in the dark, but the lack of flinch from the kunoichi confirmed his theory of the woman being an orphan. It would make their plan easier to follow. You said you were halfway through your 8th month, right? At her nod, he hummed, satisfied. That coincides perfectly with my last mission when I was in the land of waves for a month. Here is how the story goes. We've been keeping in touch all these years, and since you're adept at traveling, we decided to meet up during my stay in waves. I left without knowing about your pregnancy, and you were only able to get in touch with me recently. That would explain the Hokage why I asked for a leave. All throughout his explanation, Naruto had been nodding along, until his last remark. Wait, what? When did you ask for a leave? When I could finally access my chakra without the fear of blowing myself up and was finally able to send a toad back to the village. Naruto squinted at him, still trying to slip away from his unyielding grasp. So you lied, and tricked your way into staying in my home. Did you plan this all along? Minato seemed unrepentant as he titled his head to the side, not really answering. Finally, he said, I did plan to stay longer, because you puzzle me and I want to decipher you. You're challenging. The idea of marrying you is pretty new, I assure you. Fed up, she finally snapped as she tugged at her arm without success. Would you stop this? He shook his head, instead snaking an arm around her shoulders. It was a heavy weight keeping her still despite the light grip. It made her situation all the more real, and Naruto felt faint. How are we supposed to make this work if you're so uncomfortable when I touch you? Minato reasoned, his breath tickling her nape. It's never gonna work, anyway, she muttered, refusing to look at his too close face. Why is that? I know we get on each other's nerves, but it's pretty usual in ninja families, keeps us on our toes. Because you're my father, I can't marry my father. Naruto wanted to scream. Was it suicide, if she married him and thus made sure she would never be born? A sneakier and morbid part of her whispered that she could always marry him, and encourage him to have an affair with Kushina. She told that part to shut the fuck up. Too lost in her turmoil, she never noticed how Minato started idly playing with the shorter hair curling around her neck, long fingers weaving a dark, gold lock around them. What of my baby? People will see you're not the father, Naruto breathed out, thinking about silver hair and alabaster skin. The child was doomed to resemble at least a bit their grandfather, but not enough to be mistaken for a pair of child and parent. I'm a seal master. It's an easy enough issue to solve, the man whispered back, feeling the slim shoulders slump down in defeat. I'm never giving you an heir, the woman stated in the stilted air. Minato only smiled, a soft, gentle curve on his angular face, all trace of cunning absent from his face. Your child will be mine too. I won't ask of you anything you're not ready to give, because it's just a marriage of convenience, right? In name only, huh? He didn't miss the need of reassurance in the woman's voice, and Minato slowly led her to rest her head against his chest. Her brows softly bumped against his collarbone, and she shakily sighed. Exactly. So no need to worry, alright? What am I doing? What am I doing? What am I doing? Naruto groaned, and face still pressed in her father's chest, she rose a fist. Friends? She didn't hear the chuckles, but she felt their vibrations under her cheek. He bumped his fist against hers, and gladly replied, friends. They stayed a long moment like this, wrapped around each other in the silent kitchen. The kettle whistled, and with a sigh, Minato stood up to serve it, not forgetting to put an ungodly amount of sugar in Naruto's mug. After he handed it to her, the blonde man gingerly sat down, happy for the new milestone in their relationship. He sipped on his hot mint tea, just as Naruto blurted out, a faraway look in her eyes as she clasped her mug between her hands. So you really are a bastard, huh? Minato's face soured instantly, and he froze with his mug against his lips while Naruto smiled sheepishly at her new friend. She really needed a brain-to-mouth filter. Things had been oddly good. They still bickered, but it was more in a teasing way than a hurtful one. Naruto had missed this kind of companionship, just being able to laugh with a friend, to not watch your back all the time. It had been weird to go back to her old habits of keeping to herself. She hadn't liked it one bit, too used to human warmth, or her furry little problem grumbling constantly in the back of her mind. Minato wasn't as boisterous as her old friends, and it still hurt thinking about them, subconsciously seeking their ghosts in the corners of a room when something made her snicker, but his dry wit and warm grins made up for it. When one of his slanted smiles was directed at her, it was always followed by a large hand on her shoulder or arm. At first, Naruto shied away from the gesture, too unfamiliar, too heavy with connotation, but the more Minato touched her, the more starved she was for the innocent touches. As a child, she never had the luxury of getting hugged or being comforted by a parent. This time around, her father, though young, was at her sides, reaching for her without a second thought and easily dishing out his affection. However, the second Naruto would think about that so-called affection, her blood would run cold, and her shoulders would stiffen. They were not just a man and a woman, they had to behave a certain way, and Naruto couldn't let the shinobi lull himself into believing that this marriage would be fruitful. This isn't healthy, a voice resembling Sakura kept whispering in her ear. A disaster waiting to happen. That's why less than a week into their new routine, as they were lounging outside, Naruto said, "Hey, you're not expecting us to have sex, right?" She tried to act nonchalant while saying that, but she could feel how her face was burning and knew her cheeks must be cherry red. She coughed in her fist to try and compose herself before chancing a glance at Minato. Surely he'd be even more embarrassed than her. She remembered how Kushina told her what he'd been while alive. What greeted her instead was a smirk and arched eyebrow, something akin to challenge in the male's icy blue eyes. Naruto choked on her saliva, wondering if someone could faint from too much blood rushing to the head. "What are you smiling for, you idiot?" she screeched, subconsciously backing away from him. The smirk grew larger. Oh my, he simpered suggestively, heavily batting his lashes. With such an expression, I would almost think that you're asking to be ravished. Naruto-san, quit joking around. I'm not. I was just making sure we're on the same page, the kunoichi grumbled, refusing to look away from his face even though her awkwardness was written all over hers. Well, Minato began with a serious look. I'm a healthy young man. I have my needs. His suggestive tone ruined his seriousness, and Naruto punched his arm while he chuckled. It was always like this. She would try to have a conversation like good, responsible adults, and he would humor her for a few minutes before having his fun, always deflecting her worried questions with lewd comments or sarcasm. Be serious. Please. Maybe it was her concerned frown that made him yield, or maybe it was a good day and Minato didn't feel like stringing her along for hours. He sighed while massaging his hurt arm, his gaze never leaving Naruto's. I wasn't entirely joking. I have no idea how our relationship will evolve, after all. She swallowed through the lump in her throat, frowning ever harder than before. We're only friends. We're not a real couple. Minato leant back on his hands, the grass tickling his bare wrists. His eyes went down the length of Naruto's body, stopping at her belly. He kept looking at her enlarged stomach as he said in a low voice, "What if we become more?" No. Her reply was instantaneous, delivered in a clipped voice as she straightened her back and shoulders, fingers clamped around her knees so tight that they grew white. Instead of the arguments or annoyance she was ready to face, Minato smiled, all sweet and closed eyes, head slightly tilted so that his long bangs tickled his pointy chin. Then he opened his eyes to a slit, like a panther scrutinizing its next meal. Time will tell, I guess, he settled for, getting up to his feet. He offered his hand to help her up, and Naruto turned her head away from him, her arms crossed around her chest. He waited a bit, but when she made no move, Minato shrugged and put his hands in his pockets. I sent a message to my brother, B. He agreed to meet us in the forest. Us? Naruto begrudgingly inquired. Yes. He has to meet my wife if he's to testify of your origins when asked, not if asked. So Minato fully expected their union to be questioned, and for Naruto to be suspected of falsehood. She ignored the churning in her stomach at the word wife. Come back inside in an hour, Minato demanded, his tone brooking no debate. I'll have a meal ready for you. We need to put some meat on you, otherwise I'll be accused of neglecting my pregnant wife. You're going to make me gag, she sneered. You're way too fond of this word. This earned her an amused chuckle as Minato made his way back to the cottage. It's so that you can get used to it, Naruto-san. He called over his shoulder, and also because it was funny to see her cringe. But he would keep that piece of information to himself. How long are you gonna make me walk, man? My feet are killing me, you know, Naruto huffed, glaring at Minato's back while putting her hands on her lower back in the hope to alleviate some of the weight pushing her belly down. It was humiliating to see how her stamina had so rapidly decreased in the last week. She blamed Minato's insistence on fattening her up and practically forbidding her to train. His argument was that an A and B ranked captain was plenty enough to deal with any threat coming their way. A punch in the guts was her angry answer, though she would never admit that she had to nurse her aching knuckles for hours afterwards, while Minato condescendingly cooed at her attempt to play tough. When Minato didn't reply, the woman felt irrational anger boil through her veins. Deep down, Naruto knew it was her hormones fucking her over, but she couldn't bring herself to care. She was hurting, she was sweating, she felt gross, and the baby kept kicking her back. Now the prick was ignoring her, and she wanted to scream and punch and crawl into a hole to hide away from the world. She was about to launch a dirty attack at the ninja's back when Minato suddenly stopped and whirled around. Without comprehending why or how, Naruto found herself on the ground. Minato crouched in front of her as he threw 3 kunai at the top of a tree. They were deflected by shuriken and Minato slowly got up, fists clenched at his sides. Is that how you greet your brother, you little wanker? Do I need to cut that tongue of yours so that you learn some manners, B? The leaves in the tree rustled and B hopped down from where he was hiding, soundlessly jumping on nearby rocks so that he could still look down on the newcomers. He crossed his arms, staring at the 2 blondes behind his shades, and Naruto used that time to study her old friend. He hadn't changed much through the years, aside from his wrinkle-free face and the lack of tattoo on his cheek. She wondered if it was because he wasn't already friends with the Hachibi. With a jolt of realization, she focused on him and tried to reach for the demon. But the longer she prodded at the man, the more confused she grew. There was no demonic chakra. With a sigh, she came back to reality. Maybe it was because Kurama wasn't in her anymore, that she couldn't feel his brethren. Her sadness was quickly washed out with B's loud voice. Who's the prego chick? Don't tell me it's the fruit of your dick. One more crude word out of your mouth and you'll go back to Kumo with sewed lips. Minato cut the man off, a vein throbbing at his temple. B pursed his lips, as if weighing the cons and pros, before sighing and scratching at his beard. It was all for the rhyme, yo. Still, you didn't answer the question, bro. This, at that, he gently pulled Naruto forward, a hand between her shoulder blades, is my wife, Naruto. She's the reason I called you here. All at once, B's expression soured and he crouched down on his rock, gesturing with one hand at the kunoichi. Where does she come from? Is it a little girl from back home? The way he said home with so much scorn obviously meant Konoha. Unthinkingly, Naruto was about to proudly yell you betcha, but Minato's hand slid down her back to her hip and squeezed warningly. Let me do the talking, she understood. Actually, Naruto-san is from Kumo. Unfortunately, in the incapacity of meeting myself the rakeage to ask for the needed documents, I thought you would be so kind as to legally construct our wedding contract. Minato, come on. You know Big Bro would be delighted to see you back where you belong. Married to a Kumo citizen, at that. In his excitement, B had foregone all rapping rhymes and even jumped off the rock, arms wide open as if to embrace his long-lost brother and new wife. I'm never coming back. Kumo isn't where I belong anymore. I'm a mere bastard, remember? This stopped B on his tracks, arms slowly going down, and a frown pulling at his brows. He looked genuinely upset at Minato's calm words. I doesn't care, B tried. He adopted me, a nobody, into the family. A wry chuckle came from the exiled shinobi. Don't think too high of yourself, you're my replacement, that's all. Shocked by the callous words, Naruto harshly elbowed him. Hey! That's not cool. He frowned at her but didn't say anything in rebuttal. B didn't look hurt, meaning it wasn't the first time they had this particular conversation. Still, it didn't make it alright to say such awful things. Apologize, she hissed. Apologize, or I'm gonna kick your ass so hard you'll be able to taste the rubber of my sandal on the back of your tongue. Minato dubiously looked from her face then to her belly, but refrained from making any derogatory comment. Instead, he squared his shoulders and, chin held high, droned, I'm sorry for saying you're a replacement, even though I only stated known facts. A lopsided grin stretched B's lips. I see the sass still hasn't been beaten out of your weak ass. I could say the same about your stupidity, was Minato's reply, accompanied by his now infamous sickly sweet smile and tone. This earned him a new elbow in the side, and B's grin widened. I like your wife, she's got bite. But tell me, why should I let you two go, instead of dragging you to Kumo? Politics. Think about it. A union between a Kumo citizen and me, an exiled sharing the rakige's blood at Konoha's service? This would mean a long peace between our countries. New opportunities, too. What opportunities? We need nothing from Konoha needs. It wasn't entirely true. The land of lightning could do with new cattle, while the land of fire could do with new harvesting techniques. But these weren't what Minato had in mind to make B more inclined to go against Ice direct orders to capture the stray bastard brother in sight. As you can see, my wife is pregnant. Having a family made me open my eyes on certain matters, and I realized that I wouldn't be opposed to reconcile with my brothers. I don't want for Naruto to forever forsake her home country because of me, and I don't want my child to never know of his origins. If he hadn't been wearing his shades, Naruto is sure she would have seen his eyes pop wide open, like his mouth did. He truly seemed shocked by his brother's words, and he had to clear his voice twice before being able to say anything. Really? There was so much hope in the word that Naruto felt tears well up in her eyes. It was like watching one of the drama-filled movies Ino loved, but this time, Naruto didn't find it silly. Maybe it was because she knew the people in front of her had laughed and fought and bled with them, and it was the first time in her whole life that she'd seen be so affected by a simple promise. Yes. But for that to work, we need to go slow. No attacking me and trying to bring me back to I. Nodding eagerly, he pumped his fists in the air. Brother's gonna be so happy. We're gonna be a true family. Not right now, Minato stressed again, rubbing 2 fingers against his left temple. Dealing with me always caused him headaches. Yes, the Kumo ninja easily dismissed. So what is it you need? A marriage contract explaining you did the deed? More precisely, it has to be a contract dating back from when my mother was alive. I don't want people in Konoha questioning my union and its respectability. Naruto is clanless, you see? An orphan taken in by a wanderer when she was younger. She never lived in Kumo, always on the outskirts. I see. I'll draw up something and send a duplicate to Konoha's archives. Official enough for ya? Wonderfully so. And keep it quiet, alright? I don't need I to be aware of it until my Hokage is. He frowned, but agreed. I would act irrationally if he knew his bastard brother had made another bastard, and was keeping the kid away from Kumo on top of that. Hopefully, the promise of Minato wanting to build back their broken bonds will help smother the inevitable wrath of the Raikage. With that, he took 3 big steps and folded his arms around his brother, enclosing him in a tight embrace. It was good seeing you, Minato. Even though you're still an ass. Yeah, feelings reciprocated. Let go of me, now. With one last squeeze, the Konoha shinobi was released and he deftly pulled Naruto behind his back when he tried to smother her in an embrace. She doesn't need you to induce her labor with one of your death hug. The other man laughed, as if Minato just made a good joke. After one last farewell, he took his leave, and Minato waited a few minutes, head tilted on the side and eyes narrowed. When he was sure they were alone, he turned around and reached his arms towards the silent Kunoichi. What are you doing, weirdo? Keep your arms to yourself. Your feet hurt, and we have a long journey ahead of us. Naruto's first reaction, and she blames it on her crazy hormones, was to feel moved that the man had actually been listening to her, and was aware that her swollen ankles were slowly killing her. This reaction was quickly forgotten when her ninja side took over her doped brain. A journey? The cottage might be far, true, but not enough to consider their walk back home a journey. Something was tickling Naruto's senses and she frowned. I can walk 30 minutes. At worst, we'll make a few pauses. We're not going there. Yes we are. An annoyed tick developed on Minato's right eyebrow, and Naruto crossed her arms before dropping on the rock he had previously invaded. Look, hubby, she said the word with mockery, an echo of Minato's annoying wife. If you want this, whatever this is, to work, you need to communicate. I'm not a brainless doll you can cart around whenever you please. Minato sighed but nodded nonetheless. Alright. We're going back to Konoha. I don't trust B to actually be able to keep his mouth shut for long. It would be best for us to be home before any news of your pregnancy gets out. I won't let a potential Kumo ninja slip through his fingers. He reached out for her again, fingers wiggling. Now jump in my arms. Now she understood why the cottage had looked emptier than usual. The sneaky bastard had taken advantage of her sulking to store what he deemed important in seals, already preparing their getaway. She was glad war had taught her to always carry her most important possessions with her. With a huff, she uncrossed her arms and begrudgingly said, I don't know if it's a good idea. My former doctor she told me to avoid brisk movements towards the end of my pregnancy. I don't think tree hopping is safe. A smile blossomed on the man's lips. Like this, he looked like the carefree, joyful dad she knew. Good, we're not tree hopping, he said as he showed her a pronged kunai. She had given him back his pouch of weapons when they made their deal, and truth be told, she had never taken the time to look through it. Mouth agape, she looked at the famed kunai with envy. Just by looking at the careful calligraphy on the tag, she knew that this was the work of a meticulous genius, which she wasn't. And this, she thought, was the key to unlock her own faulty seal. This was the key home. Swallowing through the lump in her throat, she mumbled, not sure my nausea will agree with flashing through the world. You're not the first pregnant woman I would have helped traveled with my Haration. Don't worry, I wouldn't put my child's life in danger. It took a few seconds for Naruto's brain to actually catch up with the meaning of the words, because she wasn't the child he was speaking about, though she nearly had a heart attack at first, thinking her identity was found. No. He was talking about her own baby, not yours. Mine, she breathed out, feeling primitive. There it was again, that hungry glint in his eyes as he stared at her belly. Yes, but mine too. Our marriage might be fake, but we're stuck together now, and we must make the best out of it. This child will be mine to nurture, mine to educate. He crouched down, facing her, as he gently splayed his broad hands over her bulging stomach. Is it that much of a bad thing? To give them a father, is it bad? No, she mumbled, because Naruto knew what it was like to grow up without parents. But it didn't mean that she would let her father screw with the universe by being a good Samaritan. This was a man who still hadn't fallen in love, who saw nothing really worthy on this earth, attaching himself out of misplaced pity to an unborn life, and its inept, reckless mother. This was not his duty. His duty was to marry Kushina, to become Hokage, and to have his own child. Her, Naruto. Minato, she began, and he lifted up his head, shocked. This was the first time she called him by his name, and it felt weird, unnatural. I think you're getting ahead of yourself. When we'll be in Konoha, you'll see that all this? This is not what you're destined for, okay? There was a long silence, before Minato smiled. It didn't reach his eyes, and his fingers clenched lightly around her stomach before letting go. Time will tell, I guess. It was an echo of their earlier conversation, and Naruto felt like butting heads with a wall. There was no point in trying to make him see reason. She sighed, got up, and let the man carry her with one arm, belly pressed against his chest as she held onto his neck, legs dangling from his crooked elbow. When she gave her assent, he threw his palm kunai with a burst of wind chakra, and like that, they flew through the continent and countries, until they reached Konoha's gates. At most, it had taken an hour, far less than the 2 days of non-stop running required to eat away such a distance. True to his words, she didn't feel like throwing up and the baby didn't fuss. Still, she felt much better with her 2 feet on the ground and away from Minato's arms. It was obviously not the case for the man who absent-mindedly put a hand on her back and guided her through the gates as the guards and Minato exchanged hellos. Yo, touchy-feely much, old man? She hissed through clenched teeth as they stepped into the village. This only caused him to slide his hand lower down her back, his awfully sweet smile fully on. You really need to get used to it, because nobody's going to believe I won't feel protective or possessive of my pregnant wife. Still, she pulled his arm off her and was about to viciously insult him when a voice screeched, Am I Nate Yoel? The man immediately stiffened while Naruto scowled. She could swear she knew that voice. Villagers hurriedly plastered themselves to nearby walls, getting as far away as possible from the 2 blondes as thundering footsteps were heard. To the civilian eye, and even to some ninjas, it looked like a red blur stormed through the street, before it jumped on a still Minato, arms snaked around the man, holding him close as violet eyes peeked over his shoulder at the shocked blonde girl. Annoyance appeared instantly on the pale red-haired face. I can't leave you alone 1 second, can I? Came a deep, weary voice before lips were mashed together. Through all that, Minato stayed limp, and Naruto looked on with a mix of elation, because this was her mother, kissing her father, and worry. Kushina sounded a bit ill, and even her body looked slimmer. Violet eyes sought hers again, confusion replacing earlier annoyance. Mouth still against Minato's, Kushina said, Dude, I think that one's a pervert or something. Then Minato's hand roughly met Kushina's face as he pulled her off him. The only pervert I see is you. The nerve of you. You're the one who came up with that tactic. Once, Minato refuted, cheeks tinged with faint pink. You're the one who decided that every time a girl was nearby, it was a good idea to molest me. The banter was lost on Naruto's ears as she dumbly stared at her parents. This was not the enamored or even friendly Minato she had hoped to see, and this definitely was not the Kushina she had expected, because this Kushina had no and an Adam apple to go with her rough, deep voice and angular face. Her mom was a man, as was her dad. Like what? Her mind still in the midst of breaking down, Minato chose that moment to turn towards her, still keeping the Uzumaki away from him as the red-haired tried to punch him in the face. Naruto-san, this is an acquaintance of mine, Kujin Uzumaki. He was cut off by the man yelling, best friend, asshole. Not mere acquaintance, you should be grateful, believe it. The blonde man sighed and continued in a bored tone, Kujin, this is my wife. Refrain yourself from slobbering all over me from now on, thank you. Wait. Since when are you married? And I wasn't invited? You douche. This time, his punch caught Minato's shoulder, who sighed once more, already feeling drained. He had forgotten how dealing with the Uzumaki was so exhausting. Come to think of it, Naruto was kind of similar, but tamer. He inwardly wondered if it was a good idea for the 2 fiery tempers to meet. For the first time, Kujin examined his friend's wife, a wide smile stretching his lips, until he caught sight of her stomach. Smile frozen into place but eyes wide open, he asked out loud, Dude, is she, like, pregnant? Or is she, fat? In a far corner of her mind, there was a calm Naruto actually trying to make sense of the situation. The only reasonable answer she came up with was that, besides her fucked up timestamp, her space stamp had obviously been erroneous, meaning that she didn't just travel back in time, she actually managed to do the impossible and hop through fucking dimensions. Naruto was the stupidest accidental genius ever. That's it, Naruto's brain decided. Time to black out, and she gladly did so. In a fast move, Minato caught the falling Naruto and hoisted her into his arms. She was completely out, head lolling lifelessly until he properly propped her against his chest, her nose bumping into the hollow of his throat. He frowned when he felt her hot forehead against his bare skin. She was a bit too warm. Fever, he thought with an annoyed click of the tongue. What a moron. If she was exhausted, why didn't she say anything? It was one thing to whine about swollen ankles, but another to let your energy run dry. Minato sighed. From what he knew of the woman, there would be a lot more situations like this one in the near future. Sometimes he had to wonder if he had some masochistic tendencies, what with his dubious choice in friends and his recent marriage to an unknown kunoichi as oblivious as Kakashi in the matters of health. Great. He was pulled out of his thoughts by the disbelieving exclamation coming from his right, Kujin leaning towards the unconscious blonde with undisguised curiosity in his narrowed eyes. I know I'm handsome, but that's a first. Guess I can check making girls faint from too much sexiness on my bucket list, he mused out loud, a finger ready to poke at the scarred cheeks. Minato swiftly stepped aside and the redhead smirked. Relax, I can safely say I'm not interested in your little toy. I like them brand new. He gave a long look at the large belly, winking at the other ninja. Had Naruto not been pregnant, Minato would have unceremoniously dropped her to the ground and put a raisin-gan in Kujin's face. It turned out that this was the easiest way to shut him up. Instead, he glowered while the other man laughed obnoxiously, using Minato's impediment to poke him hard on the cheek, viciously digging his finger into the soft flesh beneath the cheekbone. This would undoubtedly leave a bruise. You know I'm going to pound your ass into the ground afterwards, right? The blonde gritted out between two pokes, trying to rein in his anger. The villagers were already giving them sideway glances, and he didn't want to attract more attention on Naruto. Not while she was unconscious. He instantly regretted his choice of words as Kujin leered at him, rapidly batting his eyelashes. Oh, Minato-chan, who knew getting a wife would make you so forward in your advances? When people will know we're having an affair, what will they say? Oh, dearie me. With that, he mock-swooned, fanning himself. This started to make some people speak in low voices, eyes jerking from the two blondes to the loud Uzumaki who was now winking at a group of young, blushing chunin. There was a tic developing at Minato's left eyebrow, and his hands were trembling on Naruto's body. Satisfied with his shenanigans and slightly concerned that the man would end up harming the unconscious stranger because of him, Kujin finally relented his teasing and adopted a more serious expression. Should we go to the hospital, or would you rather care for her on your own? By the way, the old man wants to see you as soon as possible. It was no secret in the village that shinobi hated the hospital and avoided it with a passion, even more so when they came from a prominent bloodline. Who knew what they did with their blood, and what kind of information they would give if under duress? Minato was no exception, and even went so far as to stock his house with medicine and first aid necessities just to not spend more time than necessary in the aseptic place. The only medic nin he trusted with his life was his student. Maybe he should ask Rin if she was knowledgeable in pregnancies. A sigh left his lips. Paranoia could really be hindering in the everyday life even though he suspected a slight fever due to exertion. He'd rather get a professional opinion and make sure everything was fine with the baby. He didn't have time to hunt Rin down, and she was a field medic. This was not really up her alley. Unconsciously, his hold on Naruto got uncomfortably tighter, and he almost jumped out of his skin when he felt a hard kick against his ribs, followed by another. Naruto moaned but didn't arouse. Slowly, he relaxed his grip. No more kicking. Huh. What a strange way to communicate. A bit like him and his brothers, really, using punches instead of words. He'll have to remedy that. Naruto would surely bash his head on a stove if the kid grew up to be too much of a jerk, though it seemed pretty much unavoidable. What with both parents being slightly unhinged. Minato took a second to let wonder fill him. He was going to be a father in a month. He was going to get a family, finally, before tearing his eyes away from the woman's belly. He caught sight of Kujin's raised eyebrows and cleared out his throat to regain his stoic composure. Hospital, he said as he started walking towards the building. Naruto-san hadn't been to the doctor in quite a while. Who knows what's going on with the baby. He'd ignore the fact that Sarutobi wanted to see him for now. He was sure the man would understand when he'd receive a missive from the gate guard stating that a stranger, registered under the name of Naruto Namikaze. Kujin cringed as he followed his colleague and friend, arms crossed behind his head. The baby, he repeated, repressing a shudder. Bleh. That's weird, man, Minato sighed. You're such a child. The nurses, for once, had been professional and kept their hands far from his private areas, though one had misty eyes when he claimed that the pregnant blonde woman was his wife, and that he expected them to treat her with due respect and the utmost care. Hopefully, his fanbase would leave him alone now. Naruto was lying in a comfortable bed, Minato looking like a hawk between the nurses. Momo, she had cheerfully presented herself, hands and a large belly, questioning each and every movement the medic did. At first, Momo-san had been endeared by his actions. It was always fun to watch a soon-to-be father from the shinobi ranks fretting over his spouse and unborn child, but quickly grew annoyed, a bland, fake smile thinly stretching her lips as Kujin snickered in the background. Well, she finally said, stepping away from the blonde woman, everything seems to be in order. Her blood pressure is a bit high, and she needs to hydrate more. I'll take a sample of her blood for future references and check up, if that's alright with you, Namikaze-san. He nodded, and after double-checking the patient's vitals, the nurse was ready to take her leave. If you have more questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Obviously, that was a lie and a formality. Momo-san was itching to just run out the door and spread the news through the hospital, that Namikaze Minato, Jounin extraordinaire, was definitely off the market. said Jounin broke her fantasy by approaching her, a notepad in hand. And where did he get it from? Actually, I do, he said as he flipped the notepad open. Thanks for offering to answer them. Should we step outside? I wouldn't want to disturb my wife's rest, and I'd like to go with you and make sure you dispose of her blood after entering the needed data. Kujin groaned from where he was standing, pinching the bridge of his nose at the look of affront on the nurse's face. Way to be blunt, man. You can't say that kind of shit to medics, Minato. It wasn't the first time the blonde man had put his foot in his mouth around the medical corps, and the redhead was sure that had Minato been anybody else, that is, a random shinobi not half as handsome as the migrant from Kumo, the hospital would have slapped him with an official ban long ago. We don't steal the blood of our patients, Namikaze-san, Momo-san gritted out, scowling. He may be a powerful and well-loved shinobi, it didn't mean he could insult their unit, but Minato just looked on, bored, clicking several times a mechanical pencil, ready to take notes. I'm not saying you do, I just want to make sure you don't. With that said, he turned all businesslike, striding towards the door and fully expecting the nurse to follow him, which she did, openly gaping at his nerve. So, what kind of food would be the most appropriate at this stage of the pregnancy? She's past the 8-month mark, you know? And should I stop her from exercising? What about right after the birth? Momo-san fumbled, taken aback. The steady blue gaze of the ninja was unnerving, she found out. Momo-san didn't have the time to recollect herself as the man suddenly turned narrowed eyes on the Uzumaki who had been leaning against the windowpane. I trust you, was all he said with a hint of threat in his voice, receiving a cheeky grin and wave in return. Having known each other for so long, it didn't take much more for Kujin to understand the meaning of Minato's words. Make sure nothing happens to my wife, otherwise, there will be hell to pay. Then, with a huff, he walked out of the room, already asking where the laboratory was, and Momo hurried after him. The door clicked shut behind them, and Minato's voice faded out amidst the nurse's overwhelmed stutters and meek protests. Silence befell the room, only disrupted by the woman's peaceful breathing. Kujin's smile fell almost instantly, a frown etched on the youthful face. He crossed his arms and glared at the blonde, readying himself for a long wait and stewing with questions. Who was she? What the hell was happening with his best friend? Why wasn't he aware of this marriage and the child on its way? Something smelt fishy here. Minato might act all annoyed and bothered, but he would never hide something so big from him. Never. Eyes closed, he let his mind wander, waiting for the enigma of a woman to wake up and give him some answers. Her head felt heavy. Her whole body did, actually. Distantly, she felt like she should be panicking. Why was she lying down? Why couldn't she remember when she went to sleep? But she felt too comfy for that. Then, her brain decided to reboot on its own, and though she felt like grumbling, Naruto was glad to know that the vortex that was her mind would soon make sense again. With that, her eyes slowly blinked open before narrowing as a way to chase the burning feeling in her eyeballs. She could see a red blur, and something tingled in the back of her mind. Something important. Then it clicked. Kushina. With a rush of realization, Naruto groggily raised her hands and roughly grabbed her mother by the chest. Pat pat. Flat. Really flat. I can't wait to tell Minato his wife felt me up, a gruff voice holding a tinge of uncertainty mumbled. Then came a snort. I knew she was a perv. That was not her mom, right? Mom? Naruto still asked, blinking as her sight slowly adjusted to the bright lights. Another snort. Sorry girl, I've been intimate enough with my dick to know I don't have the necessary bits to shit out a child. She blinked several more times to chase the blurriness as well as the confusion. Her eyes finally focused on a man with long burgundy hair whose purple eyes were looking at her like she was a new science project to dissect. He had a rugged appearance, toned arms bared for the world to see and his jounin jacket opened on his mesh tank top. His face was angular and stubbly where Naruto knew it should have been round and smooth, and only the soft curve of the nose was familiar to her. It was one she was used to see in the mirror every day. Kujin Uzumaki. Her mom turned man. Her father turned husband's best friend. Okay. That was weird and gross. She swore she could feel bile at the back of her throat. In the back of her mind she idly wondered if it now meant she had two dads. A voice that sounded like Sakura told her she was stupid, and that genetically speaking, it was impossible. Another voice that sounded like Kiba snickered something about male pregnancies and ass babies. Feeling faint, Naruto reclined against her pillows. Maybe she should just go back to sleep and never wake up again. Yep. That sounded like a good idea. Making herself comfortable, she crossed her hands on her belly, still round and hard, she noted with relief, and closed her eyes, ready to just go back in a comatose state. But the Uzumaki man loudly coughed, startling her. He noisily dragged a chair towards the bed and sat on it before directing a glare at her. I didn't get to present myself earlier, Naruto started in a small voice, wanting to make a better impression on her mom, her dad, her whatever. I should really stop thinking about them like this, she wearily thought. Those were definitely not her people, after all. But Kujin rudely cut her off. I don't care, shut up. I don't have time for this shit, Minato is due any moment now. I'll go straight to the point. Who the fuck are you? If glares could kill, Naruto was sure that she would already be attending her own funeral. She knew this Uzumaki wasn't the Kushina who had loved her unconditionally, and she knew therefore she shouldn't feel hurt by the hostility. But damn, it wasn't easy. If this was what everybody would be like, Hiruzen who had been like a grandfather, Jiraiya who had been her mentor, Kakashi who had been her lover, then she'd better get used to it. Still, she averted her eyes from the man, feeling nervous. A childhood acquaintance of Minato's. Our parents arranged our union when we were younger. It was made void when they died, but we met up again a few years ago and, well, let's say that the rest is history. She patted her belly for emphasis, feeling a bit dirty for using her child this way. Kujin's stare became harder, not moved one bit. Because you want me to believe Minato, whom I've known for 15 years, fell in love with you. Minato, who has never shown any interest in women or sex and hates Kumo more than IWA. Narrowing her eyes, Naruto shrugged. Maybe he didn't show interest because he already had me, and maybe he doesn't hate Kumo as much as you think. She then smiled sweetly, a lot like Minato did, and said, or maybe you just don't know your friend very well. You little bitch, Kujin hissed, leaning towards her. Naruto didn't recoil but felt her heartbeat speed. Like this, lips folded over white teeth and eyes glaring daggers at her, the Uzumaki looked like he was channeling his caged fox's anger. Maybe this Kujin had much more control over Kurama than Kushina did, or maybe he was just much more feral than her mom. You know, testosterone and all that crap. You know what I think? He said, voice pitched so low that despite their noses almost touching, the blonde had to strain to hear him. I think that you're a little liar who somehow tricked Minato into this farce of a marriage. I don't know how you got him to fuck that child into you, but rest assured that I'll always be there, watching your every steps and waiting for you to stumble and reveal your true colors. He leant back as light footsteps echoed in the empty corridors, a polite way for trained shinobi to announce their presence in public spaces frequented by civilians. He can be naive and too forgiving, he continued with a sharp smirk, but don't worry, it's not my case. The door slid open and in Minato walked, nose buried in his new notes. He looked up and frowned when he took notice of Naruto's pale face and glaring blue eyes. Then he took a look at his grinning friend, Kujin. The tone was ominous, and Minato's eyebrow was already twitching. What did you do? The redhead puffed his cheeks out, arms crossed. Why are you always assuming I did something? I was just having a nice chat with wifey here, right Naruto-chan? He turned a blinding smile on the woman, hands coming up to cup his cheeks in what was supposed to be a cute way, but only ended up as awkward on the grown, rugged-looking man. If she didn't know better, Naruto would have thought him genuine. Instead, he gave her the creeps and she felt slightly intimidated by the complete 180 degrees personality change. Was it schizophrenia? Mom was quite the bipolar, too, but then, were schizophrenic ninja admitted within the ranks? She was pulled out of her thoughts by the annoying high pitch of Kujin's moans as he bickered with Minato. She tuned in on their conversation, curious. They're a bunch of brats, that's what they are, the redhead complained, kicking his feet against his chair, petulant. Then you should have had no problem getting along with them, was Minato's distracted reply as he went over the scroll Kujin had handed him. And Kakashi, that little shit. Kujin suddenly snarled, gripping his hair as if he was about to tear them out. Ugh, I thought that Chidori would go right through my chest. What do you teach them, dude? They're monsters. Then he sighed and twirled a red lock around his forefinger. Fortunately, that cute Rin was there to tend to my wounds. At that, Minato looked up from the report, looking at his friend with undisguised disdain. You're disgusting. She's 13. A 9-year difference is easily overcome. True lust always prevails. Trash, Minato muttered as he shook his head, going back to the report. Don't be so prudish, you have no room to talk. You impregnated a kid. Naruto had been watching the verbal match with fascination, until she was thrown into it. Blushing furiously, she glared darkly at the smug redhead. Hey! I'm not a kid. He gave her a blatant once-over and Minato slapped the back of his head, hard. Thankfully, he grew used to these slaps and didn't even flinch as the sound resonated in the room, absent-mindedly rubbing at his sore skull. You look like you're not even 14, Kujin stated, still ogling her. It was Minato's turn to look at her speculatively before he shrugged apologetically. You do. I'm 19. She does have the boobs of a grown woman, Kujin muttered, eyes now glued to the blonde's large bosom. I'm pregnant, you ass! She screeched, doing her best to cover her. Minato hummed, pleased. They filled out quite a bit since I got to her. That's good. The baby will have plenty to feed on. You too, the other man said, nudging at his oblivious friend. He sighed when Minato blinked in confusion. Never mind. But Naruto wasn't as clueless. Furious, she struggled under her sheets and with a strength born from sheer disgust, she flung herself at the redhead, going straight for his throat. Kujin met her hands with his own larger ones, and they both tried to overpower the other, arms shaking and veins popping on their forehead. The man growled, eyes narrowed into slits. Why, you little... He cut himself off, not wanting to insult her in front of his friend. Naruto didn't have such qualms. You shitty pig, she hissed. All the while, Minato looked on with a slight smile. It sure reminded him of the early days of his friendship with the foreign Uzushio ninja. They, too, had thrown punches at each other's faces, only to later sit at a table overflowing with food after they'd helped bandage each other's wounds. He had worried a bit about Naruto not making friends because of her Kumo roots, and had put all his hopes in Kujin being his welcoming, cheery self. Once again, his friend didn't let him down. It's heartening to see you two becoming such quick friends. This prompted the two fighting adults to turn their heads towards him only to yell, "We're not friends," before returning to their battle of will. Minato ruefully shook his head and went to sit at the window, still going over Kujin's report on his team's progress. Yep. Exactly like the good old days. To be continued, Omake. Looking glumly into his half-filled cup of tea, Minato sighed. It had been a long day, and he just wanted to relax before going home to think about a new strategy for his next ANBU mission, as well as a lesson plan for his genin to follow during his absence. For once, Kujin was silently eating his dumplings, too aware of his friend's exhaustion. They were content to just grab lunch in each other's company, sometimes exchanging words about the array of foods spread in front of them. Kujin was about to hail the chief for a new round of grilled meat when a flash of light caught his attention. It was immediate. His mood soured and exasperation was written all over his face. A new gaggle of fangirls were peeping on them, or, more specifically, on the oblivious blonde shinobi. With a sigh, Kujin leant towards his friend, long crimson hair falling from his shoulder onto Minato's, effectively blocking the sight of his barely moving lips as he whispered, "Brace yourself, a group of girls are ready to come at you." 10 fingers clenched around the teacup, the only sign of annoyance betraying the blonde's aloof expression. Deeming his duty fulfilled, Kujin was about to go back to his food but Minato caught his elbow and tugged the redhead back towards him. "Say, I'm a good friend, right?" The Uzumaki rose an eyebrow. "Yeah," he drawled, confused, stretching a hand to grab a dango stick. "And how far are you ready to go for the well-being of this friendship?" At that, Kujin turned his head towards Minato's, almost bashing his nose against the blonde's sharp jaw. "I love you, bro, really. But not enough to murder a civilian." He popped the first dango in his mouth and then amended with a careless shrug, "Not in plain daylight, anyway." This earned him an arched eyebrow, followed by a pleased hum. "It was always good to know your friends had your back." "You're nuts," Minato said nonetheless. "But I'm not asking you to kill the fangirls. Just pretend to kiss me. That way, they'll think I'm not interested in the female population and will leave me alone at once." He knew it was an awkward request, and truth be told, Minato was expecting an extreme reaction, something like Kujin falling from his seat in surprise and yelling how his lips were only made to be touched by big-breasted kunoichi. Instead, the redhead blankly stared at him, the wooden spike from his dango dangling between his lips. "Dude," he started thoughtfully, twirling the stick with his tongue before removing it and pointing it at his friend, "are you in love with me or something?" There was a long silence before Minato felt the telltale pulse of a vein ready to burst at his temple. "Forget about it. I suddenly feel the intense urge to punch your teeth in." Kujin smirked, threw an arm around Minato's shoulders and brought their faces closer, noses brushing together. "Ooh, so kinky, Minato-chan. Do tell me more." 2 tanned hands surged up and grabbed the Uzumaki's collar. "I'm gonna ram a raisin gan up your ass, you little." The other man knocked their mouths together, biting the blonde's lips in retaliation for the mean words. Minato froze, and at the same moment, wails and cries of shock were heard from their peeping toms. Then Kujin leant back, a roguish smile firmly in place before he stuck his tongue at the fangirls while giving them the finger. Many ran away with tears in their eyes. With a proud huff, he turned towards his friend. "No need to thank me, Minato, you can now eat in peace." A punch met his cheek, and he tumbled to the floor as Minato slowly sat back down, left eyebrow ticking without control and hands clenching sporadically around his now cold cup. Kujin crawled back onto his chair, an affronted scowl firmly set on his face, ready to break the blonde's nose. "The fuck, man? I totally did what you asked me, and this is the thanks I get?" A dark glare quailed any further complaint from a now pouting Kujin. "Pretend," Minato hissed. "I said pretend, idiot. I can't believe you actually kissed me." The pout didn't relent as the redhead puffed out his cheeks, petulant. "PSSH, why pretend when you can have the real deal? At least, now they'll leave you alone. You know, back in Yuzushio, kissing on the lips is a common way to greet close friends." And Kujin went back to his pastries and meat, babbling about culture differences and how weird people from the continent were with public display of affection, while Minato brooded about idiotic friends, ruining the day he finally took pity on his fellow exiled and showed him sympathy when they were kids. The next day, the rumor went about that Kujin had been seen molesting a distressed Minato, and that the two were in an abusive relationship, though it wasn't sure who was the abused one. Minato swore it was the last time he'd asked Kujin for a favor, and doubled his effort to not be caught in the company of the Red Leech. Kujin, on his part, found it hilarious and privately decided that fueling the rumor mill was a fun way to pass time between missions. 2 months later, Jiraiya's book featuring 2 dashing shinobi fighting for dominance in their coupling became a bestseller, and so this signed the day the 2 exiled began to be seen by a certain writer as potent inspiration for his trash books. Yes, Jiraiya, in this universe, writes yaoi porn based on his student and his BFF. Signing his name with a flourish on the last paper presented to him, Minato leant back on his seat and adopted a seemingly relaxed posture as he met the Hokage's weary gaze. The old man was puffing on his pipe, examining each of the paper Minato had signed before handing them back to the Chunin assisting him for the day. "You can bring them to the Jonin commander now, thank you." And with that, Minato's marriage was rendered official. Relief flooded him, but he was still wary of what Sarutobi would have to say now that they were truly alone. Silence stretched out in the room, the old man gazing steadily at the blonde shinobi. He never would have guessed that the ever-perfect Minato would one day bring trouble at his doorstep. No. That was usually reserved for the hothead that was Kujin. Mind to explain to me how my best AMBU captain ended up so gravely injured that he went MIA for a week before sending a measly summon to ask, of all things, an extended leave? If Minato was surprised by the line of questioning, he was really hoping for Sarutobi to go straight to the point and ask about his choice of wife. He didn't let anything on. Adopting a neutral tone, he recited what was already written in the report he'd sent weeks ago with his toad. I'm afraid arrogance blinded my judgment, Hokage-sama. I used more chakra than necessary on my primary mission and thought that the road back home would be clear of enemy. This left me vulnerable and I was already on the verge of chakra exhaustion when a group of missing nin ambushed me. And that's when Naruto-san saved you? Minato frowned. He hadn't thought much about it, but what was the actual source of the chakra blast that torched everything around him? Not at all I remember a blast. It was definitely chakra of some sort, but it burnt like nothing I've seen or felt before. It apparently killed the missing nin. The only reason I'm still alive is because their bodies shielded me from most of it. I lost consciousness, and next thing I know, I'm at the border of the land of lightning with Naruto-san watching over me. And she's? Sarutobi made a twirling hand gesture, inviting Minato to fill in the blanks. We had a betrothal contract from when I was still living in Kumo. We met again a few years ago and kept in contact. She's been living like Jiraiya-sensei these last few years, wandering the lands without any real affiliation, learning from whoever was willing to part with a bit of their knowledge. Fascinating, Sarutobi drawled out, stuffing new tobacco into his pipe. Minato couldn't say if the old man was being sarcastic or sincere. Any reason she was right where she needed to be to lend you a helping hand? And this, now, was what Minato had been dreading. Being accused of treason, of being a double agent for Kumo. He steeled his nerves and tried his best to blush and stammer. Like a lovesick idiot he was absolutely not known to be. Ah well. Hokage-sama, I may have told my wife to meet me there. He raised a hand to scratch at his nape, his lips stretched in a silly, proud smile. I got news of her pregnancy just before leaving for my mission. That's also the reason I kind of went all out with my chakra. Sorry. Kujin would have been so proud of his acting skills. Or horrified. What was sure is that even Sarutobi was surprised by the usually cool, composed shinobi turning into a puddle of mushy feelings at the mention of his pregnant wife. The old man snorted, amused and a bit nostalgic as he was reminded of his own behavior as a new father. Ah, to be young and in love. He could almost forgive the shinobi for pulling this stunt. He sighed and let his back melt in his plushy chair. Time to stop beating around the bush. Is your brother going to be a problem, Minato-kun? The young man immediately lost all lovey-dovey expression, his fair features twisting in a nasty expression. He looked like he sucked on the sourest lemon ever. Whenever I would be mentioned in a conversation, the Namikaze would pull that face. It was quite comical at times, especially when the composed captain was giving an official report in front of the council. Sarutobi bet it was a Pavlovian reflex by now. No, Minato gritted out, eyebrows ticking and veins bulging at his temples. He looked 2 seconds away from having an aneurysm. Naruto isn't even part of Kumo's shinobi forces. There's no law against citizens marrying outside of the village. And is it the same for royalty? Now Minato was frothing at the mouth. I'm not part of the Reikage family. Kumo would beg to differ, Minato-kun. I receive monthly demands from their shinobi and citizens alike to, I quote, give back the esteemed master. It's fortunate that I is too prideful to admit he wants his brother back. The blonde glowered before taking a deep, calming breath. I won't be a problem, Hokage-sama. I spoke with B. At that, Sarutobi actually made an intriguing sound and almost choked on his smoke. This marriage means a lot, Hokage-sama. Not only for me and Naruto-san, but also for our villages. By marrying a Kumo citizen, I'm showing that I'm willing to build new connections between our villages. It's a welcome bridge, Hokage-sama, one that could be useful when it comes to alliances. Chewing on his pipe, Sarutobi hummed. It's true that he had thought of it when he'd been made aware that Minato's wife was from the rival hidden village. The Reikage might not be as vocal as his shinobi, but he still wanted the Namikaze to go back to their ranks and share his knowledge on Fuinjutsu. This union could be what both villages needed. Konoha didn't have a lot of right-on users and wouldn't spit on a helping hand to train the few users they had. The Leaf also needed raw supplies only found in the land of lightning, like metals or wool. In exchange, they could offer agricultural help and even some seals. Sarutobi eventually nodded his head up and down, agreeing with Minato. You know I can't legally make Naruto-san a Konoha citizen though. She'll have to apply for residency when she feels better. That said, the Hokage finally let a smile stretch his wrinkled mouth. Congratulations, Minato-kun. I'm glad that you found someone to build a life with. The continuation of the Namikaze clan will truly be appreciated by the village. After all, it wouldn't do for my successor to leave no legacy behind. At these words, Minato let out a relieved breath. Thank you, Hokage-sama. For 1 second, he truly believed that his stunt had cost him his dream. Bowing to the old man, he took his leave, ready to go home and cook for his whimsical wife. He looked at the darkening sky and heaved a sigh. He had so many things that needed to be done, and only 4 days of leave left first. He still had to review Naruto's medical papers from their trip to the hospital the day before. Then, he also needed to check on his genin team as well as his A and BU subordinates. And most of all, he needed to talk with Kujin and make sure the redhead wasn't angry with him. They never kept secrets from each other, and hiding a wife? That was huge. He couldn't begin to imagine what was going on in his friend's mind. But first, let's go home. The patient presents signs of dehydration as well as exhaustion. Bed rest is recommended for at least 3 days until chakra reserves are restored. The patient's baby presents no sign of harm, although its growth looks to be further developed than anticipated. Husband estimated 8 months. After examination, estimation is well into the 9th month. Due date, after 2 weeks. 9th month, huh? With a sigh, Minato rubbed his eyes and softly put the papers down on the floor where he was sitting at the old, crappy shibudai. He really ought to buy new furniture, now that he wasn't alone anymore. He scratched thoughtfully at a scuff in the wood. From that one time Kujin tried to polish one of his kunai when they were still genin and lost his grip on the slippery handle, he recalled, before heaving a new, longer sigh, already feeling exhausted by the new data collected on his blonde wife. Well, Naruto had admitted that she hadn't gone to the doctor in quite some time, he reasoned, trying not to feel angry at the neglectful kunoichi. Having lived in the forest for so many months, it wouldn't be surprising if she actually messed up while counting her trimesters. Minato frowned, glancing warily at the bedroom's door behind which the woman was sleeping. They had agreed to have separate rooms. Well, it was more that the kunoichi had insisted and wouldn't take no for an answer, until the baby was born. His home wasn't that big, and the second bedroom would soon be turned into a nursery. He thought that he'd get a whole month to smooth things out between them and start a working, durable relationship. Maybe he'd been a bit too optimistic on that front. If Naruto was in fact past the 9-month mark, as the nurse suspected, then a baby will very soon greet them. A warm feeling spread from his chest to the rest of his body, leaving him feeling all mushy and flustered. He let his head fall between his folded arms, hiding his red face from the world. A baby. A little human that would be looking at him for comfort and love. With this thought, the warmth was chased away by a clenching in his stomach. What a joke! How could he take care of a child when everyone had abandoned him as one? His father, his brother, and then his mother, who slowly succumbed to sadness and died from a broken heart. Was he able to love after a life of being denied that feeling? A snort escaped him and he buried his head further in the nest of his arms. Stupid, Kujin would be telling him, you're a fucking bleeding heart. It wasn't that far from the truth. He took a woman under his wing, promised to care for her child as his own. He conveniently forgot that it wasn't from the goodness of his heart, but really from a selfish desire to have something, someone, to call completely and utterly his. This time, he groaned as he thumped his head dully against the bones and hard muscles that made up his pillow. It really wasn't love, despite what he wished to believe one day. It was truly just selfishness and misplaced curiosity. I'm such a moron. And he was. Frankly, it was a wonder that Sarutobi still wanted him as his successor after the stunt he pulled, marrying without the council's consent, bringing a Kumo citizen inside the city, and forcing their hand in the matter as she was already pregnant with what they assumed to be the Namake's next heir. Giving his report to the Hokage had felt like being relieved from an unseen burden. His shoulders had visibly sagged, and it was as if he could finally breathe again, but shedding the warrior skin only left him lost and insecure with his own decisions. This was the Minato that Kujin always worried about, the Minato who wasn't so good with other humans but still craved warm touches, the Minato who never got over being an unwanted orphan. Tired, Minato snatched the medical papers from the floor and got up, stretching his tall frame as he walked to Naruto's bedroom. He hovered at the door, fingers brushing lightly against the wood as if trying to feel if the other person behind it was awake. But nothing happened, and Minato gave the door a last longing look before turning away, heading to his own room. He knew he was getting absurdly attached to a woman he knew nothing of, and he couldn't get it in him to stop. They were stuck together now, for better or for worse, and he was well determined to make the best at this shot at family bliss. Too bad Kujin never beat optimism out of him. Being in this timeline was weird, Naruto concluded. She didn't want to think much about the fact that she was now essentially married to her alternate world father, nor that her alternate world mother was, in fact, a man. This at least meant that she couldn't fuck up her own conception, which was a relief. Naruto had never been known to keep from destroying everything she touched, be it on purpose or not. She knew that once Minato publicly claimed her as his wife at the hospital, it wouldn't take long before the news traveled around the village, meaning that she'd either have to keep up the pretense or wreak havoc by filing for divorce. She would then be seen as a pariah because who in their right mind would slight the most prized shinobi of Konoha? Hell, maybe she'd even have Kumo riding her ass and trying to get her baby, now that bethought Minato had fathered a child. I'm in so much shit, where's Kurama when I need him? Sighing, the weary woman leaned back on her bed, rubbing her achy belly. The baby had been relentlessly kicking since she left the hospital yesterday, as if to make its dissatisfaction known to the world. She'd been having contractions too, but Ino had warned her about the Braxton Kicks thingy, so Naruto didn't put too much mind in it. She still had a whole month left to complete the cycle of a Jinchuriki pregnancy, and truth be told, she was anxious about it. Months ago, she would have told you that she couldn't wait to push the baby out of her womb, but now, Naruto was scared. She was alone, in a world she didn't know with familiar people that were not her people. Her situation was really sinking in, and it took a lot of effort to not just curl into a ball and bawl her eyes out, feeling more defeated than ever. Because despite her simple-mindedness, Naruto wasn't a complete idiot. She knew that to travel this far back into time and jump dimensions, she pulled on the Bijuu chakra. And now that Kurama was gone, it meant she didn't have the reserves needed to activate a reverse seal and go back to her own world. Hell, she didn't even have the sealing skills required for such a feat for the foreseeable future. She was well and truly stuck here, and it was a terrifying thought. A new kick, harder than the previous ones, jolted her out of her thoughts, and Naruto huffed. That brat was going to be a taijutsu beast as well as a nagging parasite. She could already feel the narcissism oozing from it. Yeah, I know you're here, quit kicking, damn it. You're such your father's kid. Kakashi owed her so much. Fucking self-absorbed bum with his fucking self-absorbed genes, she thought nastily before cozying up under the fluffy blankets, ready to call it a night. She'll let the worrying and fretting to future Naruto, because present Naruto was just so done and the world could just go and screw itself. See if she cared. Slumber slowly taking over, the young woman brought a hand to her belly, her last thought being as usual for her unborn child. See you later, baby. And then she dreamed. There was a forest. Its trees had grown high and straight, seemingly brushing the sky with their outstretched limbs. The leaves were evergreen, and there was so much of them that looking up was like looking at a green sea, waves rolling with each whisper of the wind. It was peaceful, Naruto thought. Looking down at herself, she noticed the outfit she used to wear when she was 16 and her flat, toned belly. Strange. It feels like it shouldn't be like that. Shrugging, the blonde woman looked around her. She wanted to stay on the little path of beaten dirt that slithered through the whole forest, and appeared to be the only way in and out of it. She had the acute feeling that, were she to stray from it, she'd be and remained lost. However, something pulled at her, and Naruto never was one to not follow her guts. Slowly, she drifted away from the path, stumbling her way through thick shrubs and brambles. The further she went, the more the forest seemed reluctant to let her part a way through the greeneries, trees strangely bending and twigs catching on her clothes and skin. Undeterred, she muscled her way through, following the uncanny pull and whisper, "Come. Come to me, Naruto, come." And she went deeper and deeper, until all she could see were massive clouds of dark green leaves blocking the sunlight. Soon, she was standing in front of a rocky wall that seemed to be the foot of a great mountain. A huge hole, a cave, she realized, was carved in its surface, and feet rooted to the floor. Naruto's body refused to go forward. Danger, her brain registered. Therein lays danger. The pull had stopped, and the only sounds coming to her ears were those of the forest, the brushing of leaves, the distant song of birds, and the growling of a beast. That last one was oddly comforting and struck something familiar in her core. The rumble grew louder, like rocks rolling on each other. She took a step forward, unconsciously. It was coming from the cave. Something was in the cave. Something that was calling to her. As she was about to fully step into the dark abyss, her stomach suddenly filled out before bursting open, blood splattering onto the dry soil before her legs collapsed, as did her consciousness. He had checked all the windows twice before being satisfied and ready to go to sleep. It was already nearing midnight, and he had a meeting at 8 o'clock with the Sandaime concerning his duties as his successor, and another at 10 with the council to discuss the citizenship of his unborn child. Minato knew that he needed a good night's sleep to face the consequences of his rash decisions. If he didn't play his cards well, all the work he did to be seen as a leaf shinobi would go into the drain, and he wouldn't be surprised if the Hokage, fed up with the blonde exiled, ordered Yamanaka to assess his loyalties by breaking into his mind. With a bit of luck, B had managed to talk some sense into his brother, and there wouldn't be a blood feud between the two villages. With a sigh, Minato picked up all the papers lying around and put them in a drawer before stretching his arms, trying to relieve the tense muscles to no avail. Resigned to a fate of crankiness, he flicked the light off, and just as he made to step into his room, his senses tingled. Someone was at his door. Familiar chakra. Kyujin. In a second he was at the door and silently opening it, intercepting the redhead's fist, who shot him a smile. Ah, good, now I don't have to feel guilty for knocking and waking you up. Instead of inviting his friend in, Minato wearily rubbed at his face. He was not ready to talk with the Uzumaki yet. Kyujin, if it's not a matter of life or death, it can wait tomorrow. I'm not in the mood for your idiocy. Dude, ouch, the other man grouched out, bringing a hand to his chest in mock hurt. I haven't seen you in weeks, then Sandaime-sama tells us you'll be delayed, and then you pop up with a wife and kid on the way. The more he talked, the more his eyes darkened. A serious Kyujin was a rare sight, and was usually enough to get Minato's attention. This time, however, his friend was touching a subject he'd rather have left alone for the time being. The Uzumaki frowned as Minato blatantly looked away, as if bored by the conversation. It didn't deter him to try and get to the depth of things. You were holed up in the hospital the whole day, and we didn't have a minute to ourselves. Then you spent today either locked in your house or busy with paperwork at the tower. Don't you think now is actually a good time to talk? Stubborn, the blonde man kept his mouth firmly shut, still leaning against the doorframe, clearly blocking the entrance to his apartment. Even the Uzumaki wasn't so bold as to barge in when he knew he wasn't wanted in the home of a fellow seal master. Whatever tension rising between them was broken by a shrill scream coming from the back of the house. Straightening up, both shinobi forgot about their argument and bolted into the flat and straight into the master bedroom, weapons at the ready, only to be greeted by the sight of Naruto curled around her belly, her strikingly white face streaked with tears. Her eyes were wide open but she didn't seem to see them, quiet sobs escaping from her lips as she tried to curl even more around her stomach, hands gripping tightly at her soaked shirt. While Minato stayed rooted where he stood, kunai slipping from his slack grip, Kujin didn't waste a second and ripped the blanket away from the woman, already forcing her legs up and open, his medical training kicking in. By the feel of the wet sheets, he knew she was already in labor and her water had broken. As for Naruto, she would reflect later that she was completely out of it. She had woken up to pain like nothing she had ever felt before. Trying to sit up only made her abdomen contract and burn, the pain sending her right back down, her chest heaving with her panicked breath. It was like someone took a hot poker and impaled her on it with the idea to turn her into a nice skewer. She wasn't dumb. She knew exactly what was happening, but she refused to believe it despite the wet sheets and contractions. It was too soon. She still had an entire month to go as a Jinchuriki. Ino had kept nagging her, making her keep count of her trimesters to ensure she wouldn't miss the 10-month mark, and Naruto had followed her directions obsessively, afraid her neglect would harm the only family she had left. This was this same fear that had driven her into a full-blown panic, her hands clenching on her contracting stomach, muttering no 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 as if it would keep her body from trying to push her baby out of the safety of her womb. She distantly noted that her hysteric sobs and screams must have at one point alerted Minato because here he was now, helping her to sit back against the pillows and pushing the sweaty hair out of her face. He was talking but her ears were buzzing with white noise. It was only as she felt something touch her belly that she realized her legs were propped up and Kujin was in between them, fingers prodding at her hard stomach, feeling up the contractions with chakra before moving further down the bed. For his part, Kujin took the situation in stride, leading a nervous Minato to sit at his wife's side with a cold wet cloth. Because Uzushio had been a small village, everyone was taught medical training from a young age to ensure the survival of all clans, and it had not been such a rare occurrence for youngsters to help during a delivery. Kujin had done it thrice before being sent to Konoha, and even though his knowledge dated from 15 years ago, he still knew the basics. And what he saw displeased him. Naruto was clearly rigid, not helping at all in the pushing process, and from what he could monitor, the baby was too weak to struggle its way out. Naruto, when I tell you to, you need to push, okay? Your baby needs to get out. She didn't acknowledge his words, sobbing even harder as she clutched Minato's hand tightly. The blonde man pursed his lips, not knowing what to do. Kujin knew that usually, if something displeased Minato, he would just beat the problem with his fists. However, Kujin would very much like to point out that beating the crap out of his wife would be a bit counterproductive at the moment. After repeating his command twice with no answer, Minato seemed to come to a decision. Getting up and flicking a three-pronged kunai in his grip, he reached for the woman's shoulder, fingers curling tightly around the bone and muscles. I'm taking her to the hospital. She's clearly catatonic. We'll lose both of them at this rate. Kujin stopped him, gripping his wrist tightly in his fist. There's no time for that, and they're in no condition to move. The baby is crowning already. Naruto, push. When she didn't react, Kujin put his hands on her belly and did something that he'd always been told to never do. He pressed hard in a downward motion, trying to force the baby to move along. He hoped it would jolt the woman into naturally trying to expel the babe, but the petrified look on her face and shaking limbs made him all the more aware of her vacant mind. He quickly assessed his options. She was having a mild panic attack, and they had no medicine to help ease her nerves. He couldn't perform an emergency C-section, and he needed her aware enough to not hinder the birth process. It would earn him a well-deserved thrashing afterwards, but only one thing came to his mind. Minato. Slap her, he calmly said, waiting for the next contraction. His blonde counterpart shot him an incredulous glare. You're out of your min. The redhead didn't let him finish and quick as a snake, leaned forward and promptly slapped Naruto. The shock of the hit seemed efficient enough as she sucked in a breath, her head swiveling back to look at him in surprise. What? She stopped and groaned as she reflexively pushed, finally. With the new contraction. The hell? She finished in a screech. Good, you're back with us. Listen, your next contraction is coming. Your baby's head is crowning and it looks like it's going to be a quick birth. I need you to push when I tell you to, okay? Naruto shook her head. It's too early, it shouldn't be happening. Too early or not, this kid's ready to come out now. Here it comes, push, and she did, hissing through gritted teeth. It felt like an eternity passed before the head was out, and Kujin was asking her to push again, swearing that after this one, it would go easier. I can't, she said as the burning feeling only seemed to intensify. I can't, shit, Kujin muttered with a frown, the shoulders are stuck. With a wry smile, he spared a glance towards Minato's pale face and said, sorry buddy, looks like I'm about to stick my fingers in your girl. In spite of herself, Naruto snorted, torn between hilarity. It sounded like a line straight from Kakashi's dirty books, and disgust. Did her mom-dad really say that to her? Dad-husband? She settled on a pained you fucking pig as she tried to push with the next contraction whereas Minato shot a deadly glare at his fellow shinobi. This really isn't the time for your jokes. Kujin begged to differ. It was always time for a good laugh. Deftly, he slid his fingers along the baby's head and into the blonde woman, helping the baby to move. It was slippery and he was afraid of gripping too hard or tearing the woman with his large fingers, though he was sure that at this point, Naruto had to be completely numb down there. Or at least he hoped so for her sake. He had never been gladder to be a man. Hot damn, this is the first time I've got my fingers into someone and feel grossed out instead of horny, he muttered distractedly to himself, ignoring Naruto's left foot feebly kicking his ribs and Minato's silent promise of death by Rasengan. If it was what it took to get these two out of their distress, Kujin would gladly take their ire on. He had a pseudo-nephew to greet after all. With a few more pushes and careful maneuvering, the shoulders were out and the rest of the tiny body followed easily. Minato didn't waste a second in conjuring a shadow clone to help Kujin cut the umbilical cord, his right hand tightly clutched in Naruto's and refusing to leave her side. She was shaking and panting heavily, eyes squeezed shut. The baby didn't cry out, whimpering and snuffling in Kujin's broad hands. Once he was satisfied by his examination and after a quick wash, the redhead finally turned towards Minato and handed him the tiny bundle of blankets, tufts of pale blonde hair sticking out from the mount it was buried under. "Meet your son, Minato," he said with a smile as the Namikaze stared at the newborn with reverence. Naruto had tiredly opened her eyes, following the exchange. She wanted to protest and hold her son first, but as Minato reached for the baby and carefully brought him to his chest, glassy blue eyes never straying from the tiny being, she relented and with a pang of jealousy, wondered if her father had looked at her the same way when she was born, eyes brimming with unconditional love and unsaid promises. She didn't have time to feel sorry for herself though, as Kujin coached her into pushing out the afterbirth, helping by putting chakra-infused hands on her belly and gently pressing down. When she was done, she weakly raised her arms and made grabby hands. "Give me my kid, princess. You had him long enough." Minato didn't even look angry at the name-calling, too enthralled by the baby that he carefully laid down on her chest. Naruto could feel her eyes burning and she sniffled, not even fighting the tears. She kissed her son's brow, sending a silent prayer to Kakashi. It was a small piece of her world that she brought with her, and the start of the family she had craved for years. This was their new beginning, and they'll make the most of it until they could go back to their people. This, she swore. "Welcome home, Hajime," she whispered lovingly. Kujin snorted. "Hajime, really? That poor kid is gonna be so confused during sparring lessons. I can already see how it'll go, Hajime." "No, not you, Hajime-kun." He snickered at his poor joke, but only received a glare from the new mother. "What a killjoy. You're not one to talk," Naruto drawled out, all her attention still on her son who happened to yawn, scrunching his little face before nosing at her chest. "What kind of name is Kujin anyway?" "Pff. So dumb." Their banter went on quietly, either willing to wake up the little boy who had yet to make a fuss, not even to fill his empty stomach. Meanwhile, Minato had sat down on the bed next to an oblivious Naruto, a finger gently tracing the outline of Hajime's fist. The baby grabbed on his thumb, fingers wrapping tightly around it as if trying to find an anchor in this new noisy world. He looked at the milky skin, much like his own, and the pale blonde hair reminiscent of his brother's and father's. Hajime. A beginning. Maybe Naruto wasn't wrong to name their child, because in Minato's heart, they were both his and he was theirs, this way. Maybe this would be the bridge he needed to reconnect with his estranged brothers. Maybe this was what Minato had been waiting for all this time. Maybe this was truly what love felt like. It only took 2 weeks for Naruto to recover from childbirth. She had always thought that most of her healing abilities came from her tenant, but it did appear that the famed Uzumaki longevity was not just for show. Kujin had been intrigued at her fast recovery but didn't push the matter, thinking it had to do with some minor bloodline from Kumo. The blonde Kunoichi had never been so relieved to share her father's appearance, than now, claiming the Uzumaki name would have been too complicated to explain, what with Kujin's impeccable records of his clan's history. "I was trained to be the clan scribe before Mito-sama asked me to come to Konoha," he had reluctantly explained when Minato sharply asked him to play nice with his wife, as she asked him questions about his infamous clan. After that, Naruto had decided to stop the questions that burned her lips, not wishing to be at the top of the redhead's shit list. What she learned from that brief, stilted, and very much one-sided conversation was that being a scribe was the greatest honor one could behold in a clan. They had access to the full history of the family as well as obscure jutsus. Everyone would go to the scribe for advice or even permission to learn a new technique, and only the scribe could grant it. They were meant to be the wisest of their clan. Naruto frankly couldn't see it in Kujin. He was brash, indecent, and lacked any sense of social manners. She wondered if she was this savage-looking when she was a street rat running around Konoha and yelling about her dreams. In these 2 weeks of recovery, Minato had been glued to baby Hajime. He had obtained a short parental leave from the Jonin commander, and spent every second with the tiny human that graced his life, walking around the village and proudly showing the infant to whoever was stupid enough to ask about him. They soon learned to never ask, as the blonde man couldn't shut up about the kid, blabbering about how soft his hair and skin were, how fragile he felt in his arms, but how strong his grip was already. Minato was fast becoming the most doting parent Konoha had ever seen, happily waking up in the middle of the night to tend to the crying baby and soothe his tears and change a dirty diaper, never running out of patience or love despite the growing dark rings under his eyes. When his leave came to an end, he didn't hesitate to just bundle up his child, and he'd never tire of saying these words, his child, and work in the Jounin lounge, one hand carefully holding the baby close to his heart, the other doing paperwork and filling in reports. He looked disgustingly happy, and his colleagues soon learnt that he was no less terrifying when a poor Chunin ended up with a dislocated shoulder for frightening the baby into peeing himself. Hajime had been inconsolable, and had cried every time Minato had tried to bring him back to the lounge afterwards. All that meant nothing to Naruto, though. She was jealous. Seeing the man taking such tender care of Hajime made her feel cheated and resentful of her old man. It could have been, should have been, her life. She could have had a dad to kiss her tears away too, if he hadn't decided to screw it all by sealing a chakra beast in his newborn before dying. It was stupid to be this jealous of her own son, and so she smothered this dark, ugly feeling with the unconditional love she had for Hajime, kissing his chubby cheeks and stroking a finger up and down a tiny fist just because she could. Naruto wanted her son to never doubt her love, or that of his father's. At that thought, the woman groaned and rubbed her temples. She was not stupid. By accepting to play house with the Namikes, Naruto knew she had basically agreed to lie to her baby and let Minato be a father to him for the foreseeable future. She had come to terms pretty quickly with that, actually. It's not like Hajime would have had a father to begin with, so why deprive him of one who was so eager to see him as his own? It'd be temporary anyway, she kept telling herself. She was not staying in this godforsaken world forever. They needed her back home. They were all mourning and slowly rebuilding their lives, finally at peace with all nations and ready to strengthen budding friendships. There was also the problem of her missing teammate. Naruto had made a promise when they understood Sakura went MIA, and Naruto never broke her promises. It was her ninja way. At that thought, her throat closed up and her eyes burned with repressed tears and frustration. Sakura. I'm going to find you no matter how long it'll take, I promise. But first, taking a deep breath to gain back some focus, Naruto looked at the scrolls unrolled in front of her. She was sitting cross-legged on her futon. Both her and Namikaze had agreed to have separate futons in their shared room. Naruto unwilling to share his bedding when she could see how his eyes lingered more and more on her as the days passed, working on deciphering the botch seal that sent her in this new world. Try as she might, Naruto could not see where the problem was. It didn't help that she didn't even have the original Hiraishin to help her research, and she doubted that asking Minato for a spare one would go nicely. Why did I not listen to Shikamaru? She whined as she gripped at her hair, tugging harshly as if the pain would trigger an idea. Why did I have to work on it by myself? Arg. Fed up, Naruto sealed her scrolls and hid them in her weapon pouch. Minato already snooped once in her things back in the forest. She wouldn't put it past him to do so again now that she lived with him in his village. She wished she had been smart enough and had storage seals inked on her body. But unfortunately, Naruto seemed to always use her brain after bad things happened to her. Usually, Sakura or Kakashi would be there to think in her stead. Hell, even Kurama was her backup brain. And now, she was alone with her stupidity. Naruto closed her eyes, relaxing her muscles. Time to put her dead brain to work. She was in a parallel universe. Check. Based on her own world, she was in the past. Check. People appeared to be quite different from the ones she knew. Check. Kurama was AWOL and seemingly didn't have Gyuki yet. Check. She opened her eyes, thinking. When she was feeling for the fox's chakra, she couldn't find it. Not at all. Either he was extremely well concealed in Kujin's seal, which she doubted because she was well tuned to the demonic chakra, or the Kyubi was not in Konoha, just like the Hachibi was seemingly not in Kumo. This didn't add up. It was completely different. Then her own timeline B should already have full access to his bijou and Konoha should still have their own demon under seal. Kujin said he was invited to come to Konoha by Mito Uzumaki. Was it not for the sealing of the bijou or was it something else? Fuck, I'm out of my depth. So much information was missing. She was never a fan of history, so she couldn't even compare her world to this one. Would asking questions be seen as suspicious? Perhaps she could sneak into the library and read up on this world's history after all. Minato already thought that Naruto had been cut from the world for years since she wasn't even aware of his famous parentage, so she could play on that. She'd have to be careful about her digging and not look too much into Konoha's own history, otherwise, people will get suspicious and deem her a spy. What's that face for? You look 2 seconds away from having an aneurysm. Startled, Naruto threw the first thing she found at Minato's face, cursing herself for growing too complacent in what was supposed to be her new home. Minato barely dodged the smelly socks, bouncing Hajime in his arms. He tutayed at Naruto, tutayed, like she was a child. You should be more careful, we have a kid now, we can't just throw things around. Right, Hajime? The baby gurgled, unfocused blue eyes jumping around the room before settling back on Minato's flak vest, a fist crammed in his tiny mouth. Immediately, Naruto cooed and made grabby hands at her son. Minato obliged and soon she had an armful of her little baby, reflexively checking for his diaper as she talked nonsense at her kid. Minato tilted his head to the side with a cringe. You should really try and articulate more when you talk to him. We wouldn't want him to struggle when learning how to speak." The young mother rolled her eyes. "Oh. My. God. You're so prim and proper, chill dude. My kid is obviously the best little bugger ever. He'll overcome any hardship that comes his way. Believe it. Then I hope he takes more after his biological father than you," the man muttered under his breath, dodging the low-powered air bullet jutsu Naruto spat his way. Louder, eyebrows already twitching from annoyance, Minato added, "And obviously Hajime will have to learn that violence is never the answer." "Nah, instead, Haji-chan will learn that violence is always an option," she snidely fired back. The two blondes glared at each other before simultaneously turning up their noses, one muttering about idiots, and the other mumbling about stuck-up princesses. In the middle of all that, Hajime just spat bubbles and tried his best to eat his own fingers. Feeling the need to show who was the real adult here, Minato composed himself and sat cross-legs on the floor, inches away from the woman who made silly faces at their son. He prayed to every deity he knew that the poor boy will not grow with brain damage. He smiled at Hajime and couldn't resist reaching for his chubby cheeks, his smile growing into a wide grin when the baby quickly snatched the offending finger and rammed it into his mouth to gummily chew on. Finally, he turned his attention towards his wife and observed her for a little bit. Like him, she had dark shadows under her eyes, proof that maternity was taking a toll on her, but she was still glowing with joy as she stared at Hajime. Her shoulders were a bit slumped, as if bearing a great weight, and Minato fleetingly wondered if it was just exhaustion or if something else was plaguing her mind. They had come to an amicable agreement, and were tentative friends in spite of their clashes, but their relationship was nowhere near close enough for Naruto to confide in him. Pushing the thought away, he slipped his hand away from the slackened grip of his sleepy son. "I don't know how much information was available on me in the bingo books you read, but perhaps you know that I am the leader of a genin team." Naruto narrowed her eyes at him but didn't say anything, letting him continue. "I didn't want to overwhelm you with all the changes you had to face in such a short time, and without much notice, I admit." At that, Naruto snorted. "Yeah, you can say that again, buddy." Minato chose to ignore her and talked over her, and Kyujin is not the most welcoming person you could have met, so I thought that letting you settle a bit first before meeting my team would be better than just springing them on you. Naruto had to focus hard to not flinch or whimper at the idea of seeing Kakashi again. Meeting dead parents she never knew was one thing, but meeting her precious people when their death was still fresh and she still hadn't mourned properly for them, she'd need to prepare. She cleared her throat and said in a surprisingly steady voice, "I'd be happy to meet them." "Do they already know about me?" This caused Minato to smirk at her as he reclined on his hands. He looked like the cat who got the cream. "You're the talk of the village. Everyone has heard about you without me having to say a thing." It's been a while since the rumor mill hadn't been about scandalous reports of his fake love affair with Kyujin. Minato had never been so happy to throw someone else under the wagon. He was sure Naruto was the kind of person who hated gossipers. He had to fight hard to contain his grin. He just couldn't wait for the stories to reach her ears and to see her rain her fury on the gossipers. Finally, justice. And he wouldn't have to lift a finger. Naruto took one look at his gleeful face and her troublemaker senses started to tingle. She frowned. "I feel like you're not telling me something." Immediately, Minato switched on his sickening sweet smile and waved a hand around. "Nothing for you to worry about, Naruto-san. Anyway," he clapped his hands together and leaned forwards. "I hope you're up for a visit soon. My team would really like to meet you and Hajime." Instead of giving a straight answer, Naruto hummed low under her breath. "Tell me more about them." Kakashi had been tight-lipped about his genin days, and she knew that Obito's death had haunted him his whole life. He had been utterly broken to learn his lost teammate was at the core of so much heartache later on if things were bound to be different in this world. She dearly hoped that Obito could be saved. It took a moment before she realized that Minato never started speaking, choosing instead to look at her with an arch eyebrow that screamed, "Really, woman?" as if he was deeply offended by her seemingly never-ending stupidity. Once he knew he had her attention, Minato scoffed. "As if I'm going to give you information about ninja under my command. You should know better than to ask. You're a simple civil despite your skills. Dude. I'm your wife. I'm kinda entitled to this kind of information." The words tasted like acid, but never say that Naruto didn't know how to play dirty. But it seemed she underestimated how alike they were because he smirked, batted his eyelids and cooed, "Only on paper, remember?" Well, fair is fair, she thought while grinding her teeth. She fleetingly considered the idea of using Hajime as a lethal weapon of cuteness but deemed it off-limit. She was going to be a good mother, and mothers didn't use their children to win petty fights, right? Whatever, she sniffed, making a show of not caring. "Anyway, I wanted to ask you something. I know I'm a foreigner and all that crap, but how long would it take for me to get my citizenship?" "Well, Sandame-sama said you'd have to apply for permanent residency when you feel up to it. We received B's forged marriage contract a few days ago, and we both signed our marriage certificate with the Hokage's approval. But that only made it possible for you to stay here on a renewable visa. Though it'll be pretty straightforward now that you gave birth, you can claim citizenship through Hajime's birthright." Perfect news. From what she remembered from helping around the Hokage Tower, foreign parents who had a child born in Fire Country could claim citizenship through their kid's birthright almost immediately. All she needed to do was wait for the paperwork to be signed, and then she'd be able to petition either the Jounin commander or the Hokage for a chance to join the corps. Hell, she could even just go now and be done with it. She looked at Minato with an excited glint in her eyes. When will your team come again? He shrugged. When I summon them? Awesome. Carefully settling Hajime on the futon before jumping to her feet, Naruto raced around the room gathering her stuff. She unceremoniously took off her shirt, ignoring Minato's indignant yelp of surprise as she pulled on a rather horrid orange tea over her head. Her were tender and she categorically refused to bandage them or wear a bra, deciding to wait until she burned off the last of her pregnancy fat before having to constrict her chest again. One look at Minato's tomato-red face had her snickering. Relax, man, it was just a boob. Don't tell me you're still prudish around me when I bathed your naked ass. I was on duty. We're desensitized to nudity when on duty, he hissed as if it was a good, logical argument. Well, consider me on duty 24/7 now that I have a kid. I'ma flash my boobs whenever Haji-chan needs a feeding, you know. Got a problem with that? He gritted his teeth in annoyance, face still steaming red, and croaked out, none. Good. Now be a good princess. Watch over my little bugger while I go be an adult out there. When he glanced through the corridor to give his goodbye and saw her tighten the strap of her weapon pouch and reaching for her sandals, Minato was immediately on guard. Eyes narrowing, he left a clone with their son and in a flash was standing in front of their entrance door, blocking Naruto's path. You didn't tell me where you were going, he said with a hint of disapproval in his voice. Why the weapon pouch? His stance was loose, shoulders hunched as if to convey how inoffensive he was in his baggy pants and long sleeves. But any ninja worth their kunai could have seen how his fingers were flexed, a second away from making hand signs, and how the muscles in his legs were tensed, ready to jump or kick. The real giveaway was his eyes, though. Gone was the lazy, sometimes mischievous sparkle. All that was left was steely blue eyes that reminded Naruto how deadly Minato could be with just his fingers and a little bit of chakra. Instead of reacting with anger, Naruto decided to keep her calm. I thought it'd be a good idea to go claim my citizenship as soon as possible as well as ask to pass physical tests. This way, I'll be able to ask for permission to join the ninja ranks. I'm feeling antsy when not working. Incredulity was the first thing that Minato felt. It had barely been 2 months since she gave birth and here she was, ready to fight. He remembers when they first met, how gaunt she was in spite of her pregnancy, how her diet was so poor Minato had to force-feed her the nutrients she needed. At that, his irritation with the woman grew and he scoffed. You're not joining the ranks. Taking a second to actually register what had just been said, Naruto couldn't help but chuckle, eyebrows raised as high as they could get. Excuse me? Despite the cordial words, her tone clearly indicated that she was quickly reaching her threshold of patience. It didn't seem to bother the blonde man who kept his eyes narrowed, determined to get his way. I think it was clear enough the first time. You're not going on the field. And that was it. Naruto's patience just snapped, like a rubber band stretched too wide. Mindful of Hajime slumbering in the next room, she took a deep breath to contain her urge to yell and spat venomously. Who the hell died and made you the boss of me? I can damn well do what I want, and what I want is to fight. Crossing his arms and leaning back against the door, Minato rolled his eyes. Naruto-san, he started with much derision, you're not a proper Konoha citizen yet. This discussion should not even be taking place. Hell, you were never a kunoichi to begin with. Playing mercenaries out there in the wild is not the same thing as being a shinobi in a military village. Why the sudden urge to fight in our ranks? She clenched a fist, growling at the thought of being so powerless. Here, Naruto was a nobody. Her voice held no sway. How was she supposed to find a way back if she was constrained to the village as a civilian? She would have no way into the ninja archives and she could kiss the Fuinjutsu scrolls goodbye. And even if she found no way back home, what was she supposed to do then? Let her power and knowledge go to waste? No. No, this wasn't who Naruto Uzumaki was, because... What was it that Shikamaru used to say about lying? Always lace it with a bit of truth. That's the only thing I know how to do. And now I have a reason to fight too. My son is gonna live and grow up in this village, you made damn sure of it when you claimed us as yours, so you can bet your ass I'ma fight for Konoha like a proper kunoichi ought to. Her anger momentarily quelled, she unclenched her fists, and then sniffed. Asshole, she added as an afterthought like it was a much-needed punctuation to her arguments. Unfortunately, Minato's stubbornness was equal to hers. Unmoved, he stared her down for long seconds, as if assessing if she was worth his breath. She felt like a rookie again, yelling about fighting and honor while Kakashi-sensei looked at her with barely concealed condescension. Then it's high time you set your priorities straight. I know Kumo enjoys sending new mothers to the battlefield without batting an eyelid, but we're a bit more civilized on this side of the continent. You want to fight? Fine, but count on me to make you sweat for it. You better quickly decide which is more important to you, caring for your health and that of our newborn son, or caring for your career. Having said his piece, he pushed off the door and undid his flak vest, ready to let all ninja talks behind. He rubbed a hand down his face in weariness, as he wandered back towards their room where his clone and Hajime were waiting. Just as he passed her, he couldn't help his frustration from leaking out. You just gave birth, goddammit, you reckless woman. Snarling, Naruto grabbed his elbow and roughly tugged him back so he would face her. She was done with his attitude. She was Naruto Uzumaki, damn it, nobody was allowed to make her feel like dirt, let alone an arrogant bastard who knew nothing about her. Dark blue eyes met their counterparts, and she tightened her grip on his arm, feeling the flesh give way to sturdy bones. She upped the pressure, but Minato refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing him flinch. Instead, he lifted his chin up and arched one eyebrow in an inaudible "So what? You know what, princess? You better make up your mind. It's hot and cold with you. One day you want to be my best friend, the next you act like an uppity bitch. I'm tired of your games, Namikaze. Either you play nice or we're gonna have a problem." "There's no game," Naruto scoffed. "Oh, so you just like to patronize me, got it. I'm looking out for you like a friend ought to, since you clearly aren't able to do it yourself." Finally, she released the grip she had on him, pushing him away from her. "Well, newsflash, buddy. I don't need my friends to babysit me. I'm a grown-ass woman. I make my own choices, understand?" Minato didn't answer, but he looked away without refuting her words. Taking this as a grudging yes, Naruto nodded to herself and bent down to tie back the loose bandages around her calves before putting her sandals on. She glanced at the blonde man only to see him still glaring at the wall, mutinous. Feeling pity, she decided to throw him a bone. "I appreciate the fact that you care enough to worry about my well-being, but if you really want this relationship thingy to work, you have to let me do things my way, okay?" Again, he kept quiet, but this time he met her gaze without animosity. "Good enough for her." Naruto smiled at him and stood back up from her crouch, hair securely brushed in a braid hanging down her back. She looked through the living room window and thought about taking the roofs despite the wind doing its best to uproot the trees outside. It'd be a good way to train her balance and chakra control. "Well, I'll leave Hajime to you. I'll do my best to be quick, but you know better than me how slow-going the administrative paperwork is." And with these parting words, she was out the door, leaving a disgruntled Minato behind. Huffing a sigh, he raked a hand through his messy hair and tugged at it as if to relieve a budding headache. Reckless woman, that's what she was. Utterly, completely reckless. "She'll be the death of me," he thought with furrowed brows as he dispelled his clone and flopped down beside his son, who blinked drowsily as he kicked his little feet in the air. Minato played a little bit with the yawning boy before deciding to take a nap with him. His nose buried deep in Naruto's pillow, one large hand cradling the baby to his chest, he drifted off, the scent of citrus lulling both Namikaze boys to sleep. It took only 5 days for Naruto to receive confirmation of her citizenship. Her petition to enter the ninja ranks was however rejected by the Jonin commander, and it didn't take a genius to understand why. Minato Namikaze was a scary shinobi on his way to shortly become their future Hokage, so nobody was suicidal enough to go against him. Fortunately, Naruto had no self-preservation instincts and decided to appeal directly to the Sandaime. The woman got her audience, set in a month time. It didn't bother her too much. She knew the Hokage's schedule was full, and she knew that she'd need to be in top shape anyway to prove how valued she'd be in the shinobi forces. The month of waiting was spent on training fields, battering wooden dummies to build up her pain tolerance now that her healing was slowed down. Chakra training had been easier than she had first thought, the lack of Kurama's energy making it less complicated to harness her own power. Her reserves were still stupidly large, which meant that her devastating, chakra-hungry techniques were still within her reach. Even though Minato was still angry with her, he decided that keeping up pretenses was more important than their role and decided to have his genin meet her anyway. Naruto had prepared for it, late at night when she was watching over Hajime's sleeping form. She would summon a clone, have it take Kakashi's appearance, and talk with her. It had hurt the first time. It had almost been a year now that she lost her friend and mentor. "Hey," she had mumbled through silent tears. The clone had gently wiped the tears away as Naruto had catalogued its features. It had been a bad idea because when she had looked at the details that seemed so wrong, too long hair, not enough gray eyes, a skin a shade too pale, she had realized with growing sorrow that she was already forgetting what her sensei had looked like. This was what would happen to every single one of her friends. She'd remember blurry faces and colors as if she was looking at memories through a puddle of water. "I'm sorry," Naruto had blubbered, snot making her voice stuffy as she had crumbled in her clone's arms. "I'm sorry for forgetting. I'm sorry." It had been a hell of a night, and Naruto had then and there decided to never try to summon a clone of her other dead precious people, the pain not worth it. The more she did it though, the easier it became to look at the Kakashi clones without crying. Hajime seemed entertained by the puffs of smoke and the messy gray hair, and it tore at Naruto's heart to know she'd never be able to introduce Kakashi to his son. And thus, when the time came for her to meet the genin, Naruto was ready. Or at least that's what she thought until she came face to face with the brooding teenage Kakashi one morning. A wailing Hajime attached to her arms as she wandered into the kitchen like a zombie to see her dad husband, ugh, and his students sitting around the table with scrolls and cups of tea. While Rin immediately jumped up to bow and introduce herself, Obito grimaced with sympathy and tried to protect his ears from the banshee-like screams her son was emitting. The teenage grump that once was her sensei sized her up and down only to look with great disappointment at Minato to say in a drawl, "That's your wife? I thought you always went for perfection, sensei." "She's a mess." Torn between sobs and laughter, Naruto decided that punching the team through the table was a good middle ground, and judging by Obito's delighted shouts as he jumped up and down while Minato saved their cups, he obviously agreed. Wading deep into the darkness, a fox rumbled. Fire-red eyes opened into narrowed slits as a yawn broke free of its massive jaws. Soon it groaned, laying its weary head on its paws, eyes closing anew. Soon,